That evening, I sat in my study, my hand resting on the familiar glass of whiskey, an old habit before bed. But just as I raised it, the young housemaid rushed in, her face pale. "Sir, don't drink it. There's something else in that glass." I was suspicious, but I still set it down. I didn't sleep that night. At 2 a.m., I opened the hidden cameras in the basement, and my blood ran cold when I saw my son, then my daughter-in-law, each touch that very bottle. Before we begin, drop a quick comment. Have you ever discovered a truth about someone you love that changed everything, yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs. Quick reminder, this story includes some fictionalized details to bring the message to life. What I hope stays with you is the lesson at its core. Someone whispered a warning I never expected to hear in my own home. The words came so softly, I almost missed them beneath the December rain tapping against the library windows. At 71, I still ran 6 miles every morning along Long Island Sound, a ritual I'd kept since my first year on the federal bench, and my hearing remained sharp enough to catch the slightest hesitation in a witness's testimony. But this whisper, this quiet, urgent plea, cut through 30 years of judicial certainty like a blade through silk. I had been reaching for the bottle when she spoke. Sterling Manor's Walnut Library smelled like old leather and expensive spirits at 9 p.m. the way it had every evening since I retired from the bench 5 years ago. Rain streaked the tall windows overlooking the Sound, and the lamplight caught the spines of first-edition law books my grandfather collected in the 1950s. This was my ritual, my anchor, one glass of 25-year-old single malt before bed, poured slowly, savored in the chair where I'd written 1,000 opinions that sent men to prison for life. The bottle Tanya had brought home 6 weeks ago sat on the side table, amber liquid glowing in the firelight. My daughter-in-law had excellent taste, better than my son Conrad ever showed. I wrapped my fingers around the crystal decanter's neck and lifted. "Sir, tonight, please don't drink it." Vivian stood 3 feet behind me, clearing the dinner tray with the same silent efficiency she'd shown since Denise hired her last year. 15 years old, soft-spoken, the silver dove locket at her throat, catching lamplight as she moved. She froze with the tray balanced on her hip, and I saw her knuckles whiten around the handles. I set the bottle down slowly. The thud against mahogany sounded too loud. "What did you say?" She didn't meet my eyes. The locket trembled slightly, or maybe her hands were shaking. When she finally spoke again, her voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "It's not a joke, sir. Please don't drink it. In 30 years on the federal bench, I sentenced men to life imprisonment based on evidence weaker than a child's whisper. So why was I standing here frozen, unable to move? I had stared down mob lieutenants, corporate criminals who smiled through perjury, politicians who thought their power made them untouchable. I knew how to read liars. I knew the micro-expressions that betrayed guilt, the vocal patterns that signaled deception, the body language that screamed falsehood even when the words sounded true. Vivian showed none of those signs. No fear, no hesitation, no performance. Just certainty delivered in a voice so quiet, I had to strain to hear it over the rain. "Is that some kind of joke?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No, sir." "Then explain yourself." "You're telling me someone is—" I couldn't finish the sentence. The word felt absurd in my own library, surrounded by decades of legal precedent and constitutional law. But Vivian's face had gone pale, and her grip on that silver locket looked like she was holding onto it for dear life. "Annie," I said, using the shortened name Denise preferred. "That's a very strange thing to say." "Why would you say someone is poisoning me?" She flinched at the word. For a moment I thought she might answer, might explain whatever had possessed her to make such an accusation. Instead, she just shook her head. Lips pressed tight and clutched the locket harder. Sir, please, just not tonight. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked too loud. The fire crackled. Rain drummed against the windows like fingers tapping out a warning I was too slow to understand. I stared at the bottle, the same bottle I'd been drinking from for 6 weeks, the same bottle Tanya had placed on this table with a smile and a comment about celebrating my 71st birthday properly. 6 weeks, 42 glasses. 42 nights of this exact ritual, this exact pour, this exact moment of peace before bed. And nothing had happened. No sickness, no weakness, no symptoms of anything except age and the occasional stiffness in my left knee from running. If someone had poisoned this bottle, they were doing a spectacularly poor job of it. But Vivian wasn't moving. She stood there with the tray waiting, watching me with those dark eyes that seemed too old for 15. And I realized something that made my chest tighten. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid for me. Trust is a bottle of 25-year-old spirits. You pour it slowly, savor it over decades, and never imagine someone might have poisoned it 6 weeks ago. I opened my mouth to demand a real explanation. Something more than cryptic warnings and teenage dramatics when I heard heels clicking on the hallway's hardwood floor. Sharp, precise, the rhythm I'd learned to recognize over 8 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings. Tanya, Vivian's eyes widened. She took a step back, the tray rattling slightly, and I saw her free hand close around that locket so tightly her fingernails went white. "Sir," she whispered one more time. "Please." Then she lowered her gaze to the floor. The perfect picture of a young housekeeper who'd been clearing dishes and went utterly still. Tanya walked into the library with her usual magazine-worthy elegance. 38 years old, blonde hair styled in the effortless way that took an hour to achieve MBA credentials from Wharton, framed on her office wall. My son's wife, the mother of my grandson. The woman who'd brought me this bottle 6 weeks ago with a laugh about how I deserved to celebrate properly. "You're still working?" she asked, smiling that same warm smile she'd worn for 8 years of birthdays and Thanksgivings and Christmas mornings. "You really need to learn how to rest, Sydney." I stood there holding an empty glass. The bottle sat on the table between us, amber and innocent and waiting. Vivian stood 3 feet to my left, silent, the silver locket trembling slightly at her throat. Tanya stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway chandelier, head tilted in that familiar way that meant she was about to tell me I worked too hard and needed to take better care of myself. And I had 5 seconds, maybe less, to decide whether a 15-year-old child had just saved my life or destroyed my family. The moment hung suspended, waiting for someone to break it. For the first time in 30 years on the federal bench, I had no idea what verdict to pronounce. I made the decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. I would test her. 30 years on the federal bench had taught me to control every muscle in my face, every inflection in my voice. I turned to Tanya with what I hoped looked like warmth, reaching for a second crystal glass. "Tanya, let's celebrate," I said, pouring the amber liquid into both glasses. "Our 50th anniversary is only weeks away. Join me for a toast." I watched her face the way I'd watched 1,000 defendants take the stand. The smile held for 3 seconds before something flickered behind her eyes. Just a flash there and gone so quickly that anyone who hadn't spent decades measuring human deception would have missed it. "Oh, Sydney, that's sweet," she said. "But I just had coffee upstairs. I'm really not in the mood for alcohol right now." I held out the second glass. "Just one sip. For Wanda and me. 50 years deserves that much." Her hand moved toward her throat, a tell I'd seen in countless witnesses about to change their story. She caught herself, dropped the hand to smooth her slacks instead, but I'd already marked it. "I'm doing intermittent fasting," she said, stepping back half a pace. "You know how seriously I take my health routines. Breaking my fast this late would throw off my whole schedule." How many defendants had I watched make exactly that gesture, hand to throat weight, shifting toward exit in the 3 seconds before they changed their testimony? One toast won't break your fast, I said gently, still holding the glass. It's a special occasion. Her pupils dilated. Not much, maybe 2 millimeters, but I'd learned to measure pupil dilation in cross-examination. Fear and lying both triggered the same involuntary response. She smiled again, wider this time, and it looked almost genuine if you didn't notice how her weight had shifted another inch toward the doorway. You know, caffeine keeps me awake, she said. I really can't, Sydney. You understand. Maybe tomorrow we can do a proper toast when Wanda's feeling better. 3 excuses, each one faster than the last. Each one more elaborate while achieving the same result: she would not drink from that bottle. I watched the micro-flash of fear last exactly 1.2 seconds before her professional composure slid back into place like a mask. She was very good. Better than most of the white-collar criminals I'd sentenced. But I'd spent 30 years learning to see through masks. Of course, I said. Tomorrow, then. She left the library too quickly for someone making casual excuses. Her heels clicked on the hardwood in a rhythm just slightly faster than her usual pace. I stood alone with 2 glasses of poisoned whiskey and suspicion calcifying into certainty. My hands shook as I wrapped the bottle in the linen napkin from my desk drawer, evidence preservation muscle memory from decades of cases. I thought about 42 nights of drinking from this same bottle while something accumulated in my system. 6 weeks of slow poisoning by my own daughter-in-law. I found Vivian waiting at the base of the grand staircase, exactly where I somehow knew she'd be. The silver dove locket hung at her throat, clutched in both hands. Her eyes met mine, dark and terrified and determined. Come with me, I said quietly. The small study adjacent to the library smelled like old books and furniture polish. I closed the door, set the wrapped bottle on the side table, and turned to face this child who had somehow become the key to my survival. Who are you really? I asked. How do you know about the bottle? She opened her mouth, closed it. Her fingers worked at the locket's clasp, trembling. I saw her, she whispered. Last night, in the kitchen. I saw what she did. Some debts are inherited like eye color or bone structure. This child was repaying something she didn't understand for someone who no longer existed. What did you see? She had a vial, a small one. She poured it into the bottle when she thought everyone was asleep. I was getting water and I saw her through the kitchen door. She didn't know I was there. The locket came open in her hands. Inside, pressed against faded velvet, sat a black and white photograph no larger than a postage stamp. Beneath it, embedded in the locket's base, sat something that looked like a small microchip, sophisticated work, not amateur. But it was the photograph that stopped my breath. Who gave you that locket? I asked. Who is in that photograph? Vivian looked down at the image with something like reverence. My foster mother said you saved me when I was 4 years old, she said. She said if you ever face danger, I must repay that debt even if it costs my life. She said the woman in this picture would have wanted me to protect you. I looked at the face in the black and white photograph, a woman's face I'd spent 14 years trying to forget. The kind of forgetting that required daily effort, like maintaining a lie under oath. High cheekbones, dark eyes, a judicial collar visible at the edge of the frame. Marlene, Federal District Judge Marlene Travers, who died in what the official report called a suicide in April of 2012. Who I'd loved in the brief, terrible way that ended careers and destroyed families. Who I'd chosen duty over, chosen my marriage over, chosen the law over, because I thought that's what justice demanded. And this child, this 15-year-old stranger who'd been living in my house for 11 years, was holding the only evidence that my past hadn't stayed buried at all. The locket sat open in her palm, that microchip gleaming dully beneath Marlene's face. And I understood with cold certainty that somewhere in that photograph and that chip was the answer to why Vivian knew about the poison, and why she'd waited 11 years to save my life. At 2 in the morning, you either trust what you think you know, or you verify it like a man who sentenced people to life imprisonment based on evidence. I lay beside Wanda in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling while she breathed the slow rhythm of sleep, and I could not stop seeing Marlene's face in that locket. 14 years of careful forgetting destroyed in one evening. 14 years of choosing to remember her as a judicial colleague who'd made a tragic choice, not as the woman I'd loved in the brief, terrible way that ended with her dead and me living with what I'd chosen instead. Vivian's words looped through my mind. I saw her last night in the kitchen. I saw what she did. A 15-year-old child holding a photograph of a dead federal judge and claiming she'd witnessed my daughter-in-law poisoning my nightcap. The rational response was to dismiss it as teenage delusion confusion, a mistake. The rational response was to go back to sleep and handle this in daylight with lawyers and doctors and proper procedure. But I'd spent 30 years watching rational men lie under oath, watching educated people commit murder with careful planning, watching families destroy each other over money and spite, and secrets they thought no one would ever discover. I rose at exactly 2 a.m., according to the digital clock on Wanda's nightstand, moved silently through the dark hallway past Conrad's old bedroom and the guest suite and the photographs of family vacations where everyone smiled at the camera. Down the curved staircase with my hand on the mahogany rail across the foyer's marble floor into the library that still smelled faintly of whiskey and wood smoke. I had to know. Not suspect, not theorize, not wonder. No. Evidence is like radiation, invisible until you develop the film, and by then the damage is already done, measurable in half-lives. You spend wondering if you could have acted sooner. The library was dark, except for moonlight through the windows. I didn't turn on the lamps. Instead, I moved to the east wall to the section of built-in shelving that held my grandfather's collection of maritime law journals that no one had touched in 40 years. My fingers found the copy of Admiralty Procedure 3rd edition Spine cracked from a single reading in 1952. I pulled it toward me at a 45-degree angle. The click was so quiet, I barely heard it over my own heartbeat. The entire bookshelf section, 6 feet wide, 8 feet tall, 2 feet deep, swung inward on hinges so well maintained they made no sound at all. Behind it, narrow wooden stairs descended into darkness. I'd built this security room 30 years ago, after the death threats started coming. After the first RICO conviction sent 3 organized crime figures to federal prison for life after the letters arrived, promising my family would pay for my verdicts after the FBI told me they couldn't provide protection indefinitely, and I should consider private security. Irving Cruz installed the cameras. Ran the wiring through walls during a renovation Wanda thought was just updating electrical systems. Only the 2 of us knew this room existed. Not my sons. Not my wife. Not the housekeeping staff or the gardeners or anyone else who'd lived in Sterling Manor over 3 decades. Paranoia, Conrad had called it once when I insisted on security protocols he thought were excessive. Tonight, that paranoia might be the only reason I was still alive. I descended the stairs in darkness, one hand on the wall feet, finding each step by memory. 22 steps down. At the bottom, a small landing. To the left, the real wine cellar with its racks and temperature controls and the bottles guests saw when I gave tours. To the right, a steel door set flush with the wall painted to look like wood paneling if you didn't know what you were looking for. I pressed my thumb to the biometric pad. Waited for the green light. Heard the lock disengage with a soft thunk that sounded too loud in the enclosed space. The security room was exactly as I'd left it 6 months ago during my last routine check. 12 feet by 10 wood-paneled walls, No windows, air circulation vent in the ceiling that hummed quietly when I flipped the power switch. 12 monitors mounted on the wall in a 3x4 grid, each one dark until the system booted. I stood in front of the command console, a desk that held keyboard mouse master recording drives, storing 30 days of rolling footage from every camera on the property. 16 cameras total. Kitchen, garden, front gate, driveway, both staircases. Master bedroom hallway, guest wing, library, study, garage, pool house, back entrance, wine cellar, staff quarters. Every inch of Sterling Manor except the bathrooms, because even paranoia had limits. The monitors flickered to life one by one. Green timestamp text in the corner of each screen, December 16th, 2025, 2:14:33 a.m. Current feeds showing nothing but darkness and shadows, a house asleep, no movement except the occasional shift of tree branches in the wind outside. I sat in the leather chair that creaked under my weight, despite decades of expensive maintenance. My hands shook as I reached for the keyboard. Kitchen camera 3. The angle that covered the counter where I kept my nightcap supplies, the cabinet that held the glasses, the shelf where Tanya had placed that bottle 6 weeks ago with a smile and a comment about proper celebration. I navigated to the archive, scrolled backward through timestamps. December 16th, December 15th. Stopped at 10:14 p.m. 90 minutes before Vivian had whispered her warning, 90 minutes before I'd poured 2 glasses to test whether my daughter-in-law would drink poison she'd supposedly placed there herself. The screen showed the kitchen in darkness, except for the under-cabinet LED strips that provided just enough light to move without tripping. Counters gleaming, sink empty. Island bare except for the fruit bowl Denise always kept filled. And there on the far right of the frame, the shelf that held my bottle. My finger hovered over the play button. The underground room was silent, except for the ventilation system's hum and my own breathing, which seemed too loud, like a defendant waiting for a verdict they already knew would destroy them. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life. December 15th, 10:14 p.m. Kitchen, bathed in under-cabinet lighting counters, gleaming. My finger lifted from the play button. My breathing was the only sound in the underground room, loud enough to drown out the monitor's hum, loud enough to measure the seconds before my world either collapsed or held. The kitchen door on screen was opening, and I was about to see who walked through it, carrying poison meant for me. The first person who walked through that kitchen door wasn't the daughter-in-law I'd tested hours earlier, it was my eldest son. Conrad moved across the screen at timestamp 10:14 p.m., with the casual confidence of someone who belonged in that kitchen, who'd grown up eating breakfast at that island, who'd learned to make coffee at that counter during high school mornings before debate team practice. 41 years old M&A lawyer at a Manhattan firm that paid him enough to afford his own estate in Greenwich, my firstborn, who'd called me last Sunday just to talk about nothing important, because that's what we did. He wore the navy polo shirt and khakis he'd had on at dinner. Moved directly to the refrigerator with purpose, not hesitation. Opened it. Reached past the orange juice and the mineral water to the back shelf where I kept the good bottles. My bottle, the one Tanya had brought home. The one I'd been drinking from for 6 weeks. Conrad removed it with one hand, used his elbow to close the refrigerator door. Set the bottle on the granite counter under the LED strips that provided just enough light to see clearly. Reached into his right pocket, extracted a small glass vial. I stopped breathing. The vial was maybe 2 inches tall, pharmaceutical grade, the kind that held prescription medications in powder form. Conrad twisted the cap with the same careful precision I'd watched him use at age 8 when building model ships, methodical, patient, unwilling to rush even the smallest detail. He unscrewed my bottle's cap, tapped a measured amount of white powder from the vial into the opening. Maybe a 1/4 teaspoon, maybe less. I couldn't tell from the camera angle, but his movements suggested he knew exactly how much he was adding. Then he shook the bottle. Not violently. Gently. I counted 17 times. Lawyer's precision. Making sure the powder dissolved, completely distributed evenly through the amber liquid, left no visible trace that would make me suspicious. You don't prepare for the moment you watch your firstborn son, the child you held minutes after birth, whose law school graduation made you weep with pride, carefully measure poison into a bottle labeled with your name. Conrad returned the cap, twisted it tight, placed the bottle back in the refrigerator in the exact position where Tanya had left it, adjusting it twice to match the angle. Slipped the empty vial into his pocket, checked his watch. Glanced around the kitchen, once a quick scan that would have caught anyone watching, then walked out. Timestamp 10:17 p.m., 3 minutes from entry to exit. I hit rewind, watched it again. Conrad entering, Conrad poisoning, Conrad leaving. Hit rewind, watched it a third time. My hands were frozen on the keyboard, but some part of my mind was still functioning, like a judge reviewing evidence. Conrad knew where I kept the bottle. Conrad knew I drank from it nightly. Conrad had measured and mixed with pharmaceutical knowledge. He dated a pharmacist in law school. I remembered, suddenly had learned enough about drug interactions to sound educated at dinner parties. Conrad had tried to kill me. I fast-forwarded through empty kitchen. The timestamp raced forward, 10:18, 10:25, 10:30. Nothing. Just LED lighting and granite counters, and the fruit bowl Denise kept filled. 10:37 p.m., the kitchen door opened again. Tanya. She wore a silk robe, the color of champagne blonde hair, loose around her shoulders, instead of the styled perfection she maintained during waking hours. Moved to the same refrigerator Conrad had opened 23 minutes earlier. Removed the same bottle. My stomach turned to ice. She set it on the counter. Reached into her robe pocket. Extracted a different vial smaller than Conrad's different shape, and when she unscrewed it, the powder looked darker even in the LED lighting. What does it mean when two people who share your dinner table, your holidays, your family name independently arrive at the same conclusion that you're worth more dead than alive, and neither trusts the other enough to mention it? Tanya added her powder to the bottle Conrad had already contaminated. Shook it fewer times, maybe 8, with less care than my son had shown. She didn't know Conrad had been here. Conrad didn't know about her. 2 poisons, 2 conspirators, 0 coordination. 0 coordination meant they'd accidentally created something worse than either intended. Drug interactions. Compounding toxicity. Whatever Conrad had added mixed with whatever Tanya contributed, and I'd been drinking that combination for 6 weeks. Tanya replaced the bottle exactly where she'd found it, where Conrad had positioned it, where I would reach for it tomorrow night if Vivian hadn't warned me, and disappeared through the kitchen door at 10:38 p.m. I sat in the underground darkness, watching the empty kitchen on screen, and the only sound was the ventilation system's hum and my own breathing. At exactly 3 a.m., I pulled the secure phone from the desk drawer and dialed the number I'd memorized 30 years ago. Irving Cruz answered on the second ring. "Irving, I need you to listen without asking questions until I finish," I said. He'd been my friend for 3 decades, former police chief who'd helped me survive the early RICO cases when the threats got serious enough that we'd built this room together. 73 years old now, retired to consulting work. But his mind stayed sharp as the day he'd closed his first homicide investigation. I described everything. Vivian's warning, the locket photograph, Tanya's refusal to drink, Conrad's 3 minutes, Tanya's 90 seconds. 2 poisons, same bottle, different conspirators. Irving listened without interruption. When I finished, silence stretched for 10 seconds. "Wrap the bottle in evidence bags," he said, finally, voice carrying the tactical calm that had ended 1,000 interrogations. "Courier it to Kellerman Labs in Boston. Ask for Dr. Helena Rourke, she owes me from the Volkov case. She'll run a complete toxicology panel without questions and keep it off any official records. And then you go upstairs at 6 a.m. like you do every morning. You run your 6 miles. You shower. You eat breakfast across from Conrad and pour coffee for Tanya and smile at that girl who saved your life. You pretend perfect normalcy. For how long? Until I arrive at noon with a plan that doesn't get you killed before we understand what the hell is happening in your house. He paused. Tomorrow you play the hardest role of your life, someone who knows nothing. Irving's words echoed in the underground room after I hung up someone who knows nothing. Tomorrow morning, I would sit across from Conrad at breakfast, pour coffee for Tanya, smile at Vivian clearing plates, and every gesture would be performance, every word a lie. The hardest role isn't playing innocent when you are. It's playing innocent when you've just watched 2 people you love measure out your death in powder form. The performance began the moment I walked into the breakfast room and smiled at the 2 people who'd spent last night measuring my death in powder. Tanya stood by the coffee maker at 7:30 a.m., blonde hair pulled back in casual elegance pouring from the French press into my favorite mug. "Coffee, Sydney?" she asked with that smile that had charmed my son 8 years ago. "I made it just the way you like." 30 years on the federal bench had taught me to maintain judicial composure, while convicted murderers smirked from the defense table. I deployed every molecule of that training now. "Not this morning," I said, settling into my chair with what I hoped looked like discomfort. I wasn't feeling well last night, stomach still unsettled. Conrad sat across from me reading the Wall Street Journal navy suit jacket draped over his chair, his M&A lawyer poker face matching my performance. 41 years of watching me taught him how judges controlled their expressions. I wondered if he could see through mine the way I could calculate the precise moment his hand had twisted that vial cap at 10:14 p.m. "You're getting old, Dad," he said without looking up. "Maybe cut back on the late-night reading." Vivian entered carrying toast on a silver platter, moving with the silent efficiency that had made her invisible in this house for years. She set the platter down, and our eyes met for exactly half a second, long enough for me to see she knew I knew short enough that neither Conrad nor Tanya would notice. She was the only person in this room besides me who understood what performance we were staging. Performance is a muscle judges develop early. You smile at defense attorneys whose clients you'll sentence to death. Shake hands with prosecutors you know are corrupt. Maintain composure when witness testimony makes you want to vomit. But I'd never performed for an audience trying to kill me. I ate dry toast, made small talk about Conrad's merger case and Tanya's spa plans, laughed at Conrad's joke about opposing counsel, watched the kitchen clock crawl toward the moment they would both leave. Conrad departed at 8:15 for Manhattan, kissing Tanya goodbye with what looked like genuine affection. She followed at 8:30, mentioning Greenwich and appointments I knew were probably lies. The house went quiet. I sat alone at the breakfast table for 5 minutes, hands flat against mahogany, breathing like I'd finished my morning run. Then I stood and walked to the library. The poisoned bottle sat where I'd left it, wrapped in linen. Irving had left plastic evidence bags in my mailbox before dawn. I'd found them at 6 a.m. when I collected the newspaper I no longer read. I handled the bottle with the cloth, never letting skin touch glass. Slipped it into the evidence bag. Sealed it. Labeled it with only the reference number Irving provided. The courier arrived at exactly 9 a.m. professional service that asked no questions, just signed, and drove toward Boston, where Dr. Helena Rourke would run toxicology panels. My hands didn't start shaking until after the van disappeared. I spent the afternoon in my study overlooking the backyard, pretending to review investment statements, while replaying Conrad's 17 careful shakes, Tanya's 8 careless ones. At 2 p.m. movement in the garden caught my eye. Vivian walked across the winter lawn toward the rose beds, where Denise Yates worked with pruning shears, cutting back dead growth from plants that wouldn't bloom until May. Denise had been our housekeeper for 11 years, moving into staff quarters with a quiet foster daughter no one questioned, because good help was hard to find. 58 years old, gray hair in a practical bun, hands that moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime in service. She'd raised Vivian since the girl was 5, though I'd never asked details, because it wasn't my business, and Denise's references were impeccable. I watched through the study window as Vivian approached, speaking words I couldn't hear. Saw Denise freeze mid-cut pruning shears suspended. Watched her shake her head slowly, then faster, then put down the shears and reach for Vivian's shoulders. Denise's mouth formed words I could read from 50 yards. "Maria isn't your mother." Vivian stepped back like she'd been struck. How many identities can one 15-year-old girl lose before she stops believing she exists at all? Rescued victim, foster daughter, secret keeper, and now not even the daughter of the woman she mourned. 10 minutes later, Vivian appeared in my study doorway. The silver locket hung at her throat, clutched in one hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes were dry, but her face carried the shock of someone whose foundation just crumbled. "Oh, did you know?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "All these years, did you know I wasn't who I thought I was?" I set down the investment statements I hadn't been reading. "What did Denise tell you?" "Huh," she said. "Maria, the woman I called mother, wasn't my mother at all." Vivian's fingers worked at the locket clasp. "She said when I turn 18, someone will tell me the truth. But I don't want to wait 3 years to find out who I am." She stood framed in my study doorway, silver locket trembling at her throat, asking if I'd known all along that she wasn't who she thought she was. I had 48 hours of evidence that my family wanted me dead, a photograph in that locket of a woman I'd loved and lost 14 years ago. And now this child, discovering her entire identity, was constructed fiction. The question wasn't whether I knew. The question was, how much truth could either of us survive learning at once? When Irving Cruz walked through my back entrance at 7 p.m. and saw Vivian in the hallway, the look on his face told me he'd known her secret longer than I had. I hadn't answered Vivian's question yet, the one about whether I'd known all along that she wasn't who she thought she was. I'd asked her to wait in her room while I processed everything, promised we'd talk after Irving arrived with the toxicology results. She'd nodded and left my study clutching that silver locket like it was the only solid thing in a world that kept dissolving beneath her feet. Now Irving stood in my hallway. December evening cold still clinging to his overcoat, and his 73-year-old eyes tracked Vivian as she carried dinner plates toward the kitchen. I'd known this man for 3 decades, watched him interrogate murderers and drug lords and white-collar criminals with a poker face that gave away nothing. That face was failing him now. Vivian passed us without looking up, disappearing through the kitchen door. Irving waited until her footsteps faded, then pulled me into the study hallway and lowered his voice to barely above a whisper. "Sam, you look at her every day. Do you really think I don't notice some?" I'd heard Irving use my first name maybe a dozen times in 30 years. Always in moments when professional distance couldn't hold. "You know who she is," I said, not a question. "I've known since March 9th, 2014 at 3:47 a.m. New Bedford Harbor." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd been carrying a secret too long. "But we're not talking about that tonight. We talk about who's trying to kill you." Behind the partially closed study door, I saw movement. Vivian frozen with her hand on the frame, the silver locket trembling at her throat. She'd heard. Of course she'd heard. And now she knew that whatever truth I'd been protecting wasn't just mine. It was Irving's too, wrapped in a specific date and time and location that meant something I wasn't ready to understand yet. There's a specific kind of pain when someone who's known your secrets for 30 years looks at a child in your house and you realize he's been carrying her secret too, waiting for you to be ready to hear it, knowing you might never be. Irving moved past me into the study. I followed, closing the door on Vivian's frozen expression, and we stood on opposite sides of the mahogany desk, where I'd reviewed 1,000 case files over decades of judicial work. He spread Dr. Helena Rourke's preliminary toxicology report across the wood like evidence exhibits in a trial. The Kellerman Labs completed analysis in 9 hours instead of the standard 48, Irving said. I called in the Volkov favor. Helena ran it personally and kept it off official records. I scanned the document. Medical terminology and clinical language, but the conclusion was clear enough for anyone who'd read autopsy reports. Amiodarone, 340 milligrams. Warfarin, 12 milligrams. Per 750 milliliter bottle. Dr. Rourke says the combination is what makes it lethal. Irving continued, pointing to highlighted sections. Either drug alone would make you sick, nausea, fatigue, maybe some cardiac irregularity. Both together consumed over 2 weeks would cause catastrophic arrhythmia masquerading as natural cardiac arrest in a man your age. And it would look completely natural, I said. Geez, that's the genius of it. No gunshot, no knife wound, no struggle. Just a 71-year-old judge who worked too hard and ignored his doctor's warnings. Irving met my eyes. Legal cause of death would be heart failure from stress and overwork. Perfect crime except for a 15-year-old witness and your paranoid security cameras. I thought about Conrad's 17 careful shakes. Tanya's 8 careless ones. Both of them measuring death in powder form, while I drank from that bottle for 6 weeks, accumulating poison in my system, until my heart would simply stop one night in my sleep. Revenge is a dish best served cold, they say. But someone had served this revenge at precisely body temperature in powder form, measured by my own son's hand, funded through my daughter-in-law's greed. There's more, Irving said, opening a second folder. Bank records. Financial forensics. The kind of documentation that took months to obtain through official channels, but hours when you knew which former colleagues to call, which favors to cash in from 30 years in law enforcement. 6 months of Tanya's personal Cayman account. Irving explained, spreading the pages. $4.3 million transferred in 12 installments between December 2024 and May 2025. All from a shell company called Voss Halberstadt Capital Partners, LLC. I stopped breathing. Voss. That can't be. Irving's expression told me it could be. It was. Sylvester Dunn paroled December 2024 after serving 10 years of an 18-year sentence, Irving said quietly. The Voss alias is how he operated the trafficking network before you took him down. Eastern European connections, shell companies, money laundering, the whole RICO case you prosecuted in 2014. I remembered that trial. 6 weeks of testimony. 18 victims willing to testify against the man who'd trafficked them across 3 states. Sylvester Dunn sitting at the defense table with that smile that never reached his eyes, watching me like he was memorizing my face for future reference. I sentenced him in 2014, I said. He's been in prison planning this for a decade. 10 years, Irving corrected. Good behavior model prisoner, took every rehabilitation program the system offered. Parole board voted 3-2 to release him last December. 3 months later, the first payment hits Tanya's account. I stared at the Voss Halberstadt documents. 12 payments. $4.3 million. My daughter-in-law's signature on receipt confirmations, her Cayman account number, transfers timed with precision that spoke to planning that went back months, maybe years. He recruited her, I said. Sylvester recruited Tanya while he was still in prison. Or earlier. We're still tracing the timeline. But Sam... Irving's voice dropped. The trafficking network you dismantled in 2014 included judges, prosecutors, law enforcement. Sylvester had connections across the eastern seaboard. One of them was... Marlene, I whispered. Irving nodded slowly. One of them was Marlene Travers, federal district judge, who died in what the official report called a suicide 2 years before you sentenced Sylvester. April 2012. The room tilted. I gripped the desk edge to keep standing. I stared at the documents spread across my desk. $4.3 million, 6 months of payments Cayman Shell Company. In 2014, I'd signed Sylvester Dunn's 18-year sentence, believing justice was served. I'd been wrong. He'd signed my death sentence years earlier from a prison cell using my own family as the weapon and my daughter-in-law as the executor. And somewhere in those 14 years, between his courtroom and my kitchen, he'd done something I was only beginning to understand. He'd killed the woman whose photograph Vivian wore in that silver locket. 2 days after learning my family was poisoning me, I drove to Hartford to discover how much they thought my death was worth. Irving had spent the night after showing me Sylvester Dunn's Voss Halberstadt documents, making phone calls to people who owed him favors, former colleagues, retired investigators, attorneys who'd worked cases with him over 3 decades. By morning, he'd tracked something that made him tell me to call Zenobia Weaver immediately. "She's been trying to reach you for 72 hours, Irving had said. "Apparently there's something about your estate planning you need to see. Something that couldn't wait." I arrived at Zenobia's Hartford office at 9 a.m. on December 19th. Zenobia Weaver, 64 sharp, as the day we graduated. Yale Law together in 1985, sat behind her desk with insurance documents spread across the surface like evidence exhibits. Her face carried the grim expression of someone who'd spent 3 days verifying information they'd hoped was wrong. Coffee sat cold beside her laptop, showing Connecticut's state insurance database. 2 manila folders lay in front of her labeled with policy numbers I'd never seen before. "Sam, sit down before I show you this," she said. "You're going to need to be sitting." I'd known Zenobia for 40 years, seen her handle billion-dollar estates and family disputes that turned violent. She didn't rattle easily. The fact that she thought I needed to sit down meant whatever was in those folders would be worse than I imagined. "How bad is it?" I asked, lowering myself into the leather chair across from her desk. "It's not 1 policy, it's 2. And that's just the beginning of what's wrong. Life insurance is supposed to be love translated into financial protection, a father's way of saying, 'I'll take care of you even after I'm gone.' But these policies were betting slips on a horse race where I was the horse and my family held tickets on when I'd fall." Zenobia opened the first folder. $22 million, she said. "Whole life policy beneficiary Conrad Barton. Application dated August 14th, 2025. Annual premium $47,000. She slid the application across the desk. My signature sat at the bottom, or what looked like my signature. The handwriting matched perfectly. The notary stamp looked official. Everything appeared legitimate except for one crucial detail. I never signed this," I said. "I was at Cape Cod in July, the Bar Association conference. I didn't apply for any insurance in August." "Someone signed it," Zenobia said. "The medical examination was conducted July 23, 2025 by Dr. Wendell Gomez, your family physician. Results filed with Mutual of Hartford August 1st. Policy issued August 14th. Conrad is listed as primary beneficiary. Dr. Wendell Gomez. The same physician who'd treated our family for 8 years, who'd come to dinner parties and holiday gatherings, who I'd recommended to 3 colleagues because he was thorough and professional and seemed genuinely invested in his patients' well-being. He was part of this too." "Wendell," I said. "He's part of this too." "Gets worse," Zenobia said, opening the second folder. This one was filed November 29th, 2025, 3 months after Conrad's policy. $15 million term life. Same medical exam Dr. Gomez used the July results for both applications. Same forged signature. Different insurance company, Equitable Life, Boston. She paused before continuing. Beneficiary is Tanya Barton, exclusively. Conrad's not listed anywhere, not as co-beneficiary, not as applicant, not informed. This policy exists and your son has no idea. I stared at the second application. Tanya's name in the beneficiary field. $15 million. Filed 3 months after Conrad had forged my signature for $22 million. How do you process discovering your son forged your signature for $22 million in August, and 3 months later your daughter-in-law did the same for $15 million more, and neither one trusted the other enough to coordinate each running their own insurance scam on your corpse? She's playing him too, I said. Whatever she's planning, Conrad's not the only beneficiary, and probably not her only partner. That's my assessment, Zenobia agreed. Conrad thinks he's getting $22 million when you die. Tanya knows she's getting $37 million, Conrad's $22 plus her secret $15. But I'd bet my law license that Conrad has no idea about the second policy. She pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop, turned it toward me. Total death benefit if both policies pay out $37 million. Both policies have clauses excluding suicide for 2 years, meaning if you died of apparent natural causes anytime after August 2027, both companies would have to pay. But you've been drinking poison since early December. If you'd died on schedule, probably late December or early January based on the toxicology Irving shared with me, both policies would still be in contestable period. So they were willing to risk the insurance companies investigating, I said, or they're confident the death would look natural enough that investigation wouldn't find anything. 71-year-old retired judge, history of long hours, stress from decades on the bench, family physician, confirming cardiac concerns during the July exam. Zenobia met my eyes. Sam, these policies aren't life insurance. They're business transactions. $37 million is what your family decided you're worth dead. I stared at the 2 policies spread across her conference table. $22 million and $15 million. August and November. Conrad and Tanya. Same forgery technique, different insurance companies, neither conspirator knowing about the other's policy. $37 million. That wasn't a number. That was the price they'd put on 50 years of marriage, 2 sons I'd raised, a daughter-in-law I'd welcomed into my family, and a life I'd spent building something worth more than money. Zenobia, I said quietly, you said this was just the beginning of what's wrong. What else did you find? She reached for a third folder I hadn't noticed sitting at the edge of her desk, thicker than the first 2. Bound with red legal tape that meant documents requiring special handling. 3 years of mortgage documents, she said. All bearing your signature, all fraudulent. Total value $8.7 million. And somewhere in a Cayman Islands shell company, Sylvester Dunn was watching both of them steal from each other while they stole from me. Vivian knocked on my study door at 4 in the afternoon, holding a notepad with my daughter-in-law's handwriting and the Hartford ICE office address. I'd just returned from Zenobia's office where she'd shown me the third folder, the one containing 3 years of mortgage fraud I hadn't had time to process yet, because my brain was still calculating how $37 million in fraudulent insurance plus millions in forged mortgages added up to a family I no longer recognized. Vivian entered without waiting for permission, which told me something was urgent. She held the notepad at arm's length like it was contaminated, her face carrying an expression somewhere between calm and amused that I was learning meant she knew something the person who'd tried to threaten her didn't. She left this on the kitchen counter, Vivian said, handing it to me. She thinks I'm undocumented. I looked at the message written in Tanya's precise MBA handwriting, the kind of penmanship they teach at Wharton, to project confidence and control. Ice Hartford, 450 Main Street. You are undocumented Mexican. One call housekeeper loses job, you're deported in 24 hours. Stay quiet. Are you, I asked. Undocumented. Mr. Cruz arranged papers 11 years ago when I came here, Vivian said. Everything legal, everything documented. Asylum paperwork, green card, social security card filed with the state. She doesn't know that. The ICE threat was so amateur, it almost made me laugh until I realized that's what desperation looks like. And desperate conspirators are the most dangerous kind because they stop planning and start reacting. I examined the notepad more carefully. Tanya had pressed hard enough with the pen that indentations showed through 3 pages beneath. 3 underlines beneath the word deported. Exclamation points that punctured the paper. This wasn't the calculated professional poisoning I'd watched on CCTV, this was panic. She suspects you know something, I said. Overheard something, saw something beyond the nightcap warning. She's right, Vivian said simply. I know everything. I've been watching her for 3 weeks, taking photographs of her meetings, recording conversations when she thinks the house is empty. Mr. Cruz taught me how. I looked at this 15-year-old child who'd spent 3 weeks conducting surveillance on my daughter-in-law while I'd been drinking poison and playing the role of oblivious patriarch. She's getting nervous, I said. Good. Nervous people make mistakes. Should I pretend to be scared? Vivian asked. No. Let her wonder why you're not. Let her panic more. Vivian nodded once and left, taking the notepad with her. I sat alone in my study, thinking about the difference between Sylvester Dunn's decade-long professional revenge operation and Tanya's amateur ICE threat, scrawled on kitchen notepad paper. She was the weak link, the one who'd crack first when pressure was applied correctly. I just had to figure out how to apply that pressure without getting killed in the process. The next morning, I drove back to Hartford. Zenobia had called at 7 a.m. saying the forensic document analysis was complete and I needed to see it immediately. She spread 7 mortgage applications across her conference table at 11 a.m. on December 20th. Each one bore my signature, or what looked like my signature to anyone who didn't know me well enough to spot the forgery. Handwriting expert compared these against your genuine signatures from court documents. Zenobia explained. Pressure points are different. Pen angle is wrong. The micro tremors that 71-year-old hands develop absent in every forgery. These were signed by someone younger. Someone who'd studied your signature carefully, but couldn't replicate the physical reality of aging. A signature is supposed to be the most intimate form of identity, the flourish that says, I was here. I agreed to this, I stake my name on it. But Conrad had been stealing my identity 1 mortgage at a time, wearing my handwriting like a mask while sitting across from me at family dinners. Total value. I asked, though I already knew from yesterday. $8.7 million. 7 mortgages filed over 3 years and 2 months. Zenobia pointed to dates on each document. First 1 November 2023. 6 years after Conrad married Tanya in 2017. So this operation began in 2023, not when they first got together. I studied the timeline. November 2023, March 2024, July 2024, November 2024, February 2025, June 2025, October 2025. The pattern is consistent, Zenobia continued. Every mortgage filed the week after Thanksgiving, 2023, 2024, 2025, like clockwork. I remembered those Thanksgivings. Sterling Manor dining room filled with family. Wanda at one end of the table, me at the other. Conrad and Tanya sitting together, Jasper in his high chair. The turkey I'd carved. The wine I'd poured. The conversations about Conrad's M&A cases at the firm. How business was good. How he was making partner soon. I carved the turkey, I said quietly. I poured the wine. I asked him about his cases at the firm. And then he went back to his office and forged your signature for another $2 million. Zenobia finished. She spread the documents in chronological order so I could see the progression. November 2023, $1.2 million. March 2024, $800,000. July 2024, $1.5 million. November 2024, $1.1 million. February 2025, $900,000. June 2025, $1.3 million. October 2025, $2 million. Each one filed the week after Thanksgiving. Each one bearing my forged signature. Each one approved by banks that trusted a federal judge's application wouldn't be fraudulent. For 3 years, I'd sat next to him at that table. For 3 years, I'd been grateful he'd come home for the holidays, that he'd taken time away from his busy Manhattan practice to spend Thanksgiving with his aging parents. And for 3 years, he'd gone back to forge my signature on documents that would drain everything I'd built over 50 years of work. $8.7 million, I said. Stolen while I was carving turkey and asking about his cases. Zenobia nodded. The Thanksgiving pattern suggests he needed family contact to study your current signature, how it's evolved as you've aged. Each year, he'd see you sign something innocuous, a birthday card or check, and he'd update his forgery technique. I stared at the 7 documents spread across her conference table and understood something that made my chest tighten. Every family memory I had from the past 3 years was contaminated now. Every Thanksgiving dinner, every Christmas morning, every Sunday phone call where Conrad asked about my health and my plans and my estate. He wasn't making conversation. He was gathering intelligence for the next forgery. The morning I learned my driver had been an undercover operative for 11 years, I was 3 miles into my 6-mile run and thinking about Thanksgiving dinners. I couldn't stop replaying those meals, the conversations that sounded innocent but weren't. Conrad asking about my investment portfolio. Tanya commenting on my health with concern I'd mistaken for affection. Every question, every observation, every moment of family connection had been intelligence gathering for the forgeries I now knew spanned 3 years. The sky over Long Island Sound was turning from gray to pink as I ran past the Sterling Manor garage at 6 a.m. on December 21st. Ellis Kelly, 56, former Iraqi Marines vet who'd driven our family cars for 11 years, stood beside the vintage Mercedes detailing cloth in hand, waving me over. I slowed to a stop, breath fogging in the December cold. Sir, today, Tanya asked me to drive to Cipriani, 42nd Street, 2 p.m., Ellis said without preamble. This is the 6th time. Morning jogs are supposed to clear your mind. 6 miles along Long Island Sound, salt air rhythm of feet, on pavement, 30 years of solving impossible cases while my body moves on autopilot. But that morning, every step just added another question I couldn't answer. 6th time? I asked. December 2024 through May 2025. Same table every time. Corner position. 90-minute lunch with a silver-haired man in a black Brunello Cucinelli coat. My chest went cold, despite the running warmth. Silver-haired man, black coat, Brunello Cucinelli. You know him, Ellis said, not a question. I thought you might. Sylvester Dunn. That was his signature look. Since 2010, expensive Italian suits, silver hair, styled precisely always Brunello Cucinelli, because he'd told a Times reporter during his trial that cheap fabric was for people without taste. Cipriani had been his favorite restaurant before prison, the place where he'd conducted business that looked legitimate until you understood what deals were actually being made. "I know him," I said. "Why are you telling me this now?" Ellis glanced toward the house, then back to me. "Irving's my cousin. He placed me here in 2015 to protect the girl." The world tilted slightly. 11 years, I said. "You've been watching for 11 years. Every school morning, every Tanya movement, everything." Ellis pulled out his phone, showed me a photo, Tanya and Sylvester, at a corner table, heads close together, wine glasses between them. Date stamp, March 15th, 2025. "I have photographs of all 6 meetings, possibly audio recordings depending on table position and equipment quality." I stared at the photograph. Tanya smiling at Sylvester with an expression I'd never seen her wear at family dinners. Intimate, conspiratorial, planning. "The conspiracy predates the insurance policies," I said. "Cheap by months, possibly years. First meeting I documented was December 2024, 3 weeks after Sylvester's parole. But the way they interacted, that wasn't a first meeting. That was continuation of something already established. How many people had Irving Cruz planted in my life without telling me, cousin as driver connections at Boston Toxicology Lab? Probably others I hadn't identified yet. And was I grateful for this invisible protection network, or horrified that I'd needed it without knowing? "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I asked. "Nah," Irving said, "wait until we had complete picture, until we understood full scope of conspiracy. He didn't want you acting on partial information and getting killed before we could protect you properly." Ellis handed me the phone with the photograph still displayed. "Today's meeting is at 2 p.m. Irving thinks it's endgame planning. Your death is getting close to their timeline, and they're finalizing details. He wants me to record everything." I nodded, handed back the phone, and continued my run. But the rhythm was broken, the mental clarity gone, replaced by the image of Tanya and Sylvester planning my murder over expensive wine at Cipriani while my family driver photographed them from the car. That evening, at 8 p.m., Irving arrived at my study carrying a folder I recognized from his retired FBI contact's federal case file, official seals, documentation that shouldn't exist outside law enforcement databases. "New Bedford, Massachusetts," Irving said, spreading papers across my desk. "March 9th, 2014, 3:47 a.m. Harbor rescue operation. Trafficking ring, 18 victims." I'd heard this story before, the date he'd mentioned when he first saw Vivian, but I'd never seen the official documentation. "Girl identified as Sasha Mendoza." Irving continued. "Age 4, Mexican national, rescued from cargo container, critical condition, transported to Boston Medical Center." He slid a hospital photograph across the desk. A small girl with dark hair, unconscious, breathing tube monitors. I couldn't tell if it was Vivian. The image was too clinical, too focused on medical intervention to show features clearly. "And?" I asked. Irving placed a second document on top of the photograph. Official Massachusetts death certificate. State seal. Physician signature. Filed with vital records. Name Sasha Mendoza. Date of death: September 23rd, 2014. Cause pulmonary complications, secondary to trauma, location Boston Medical Center. "This death certificate is real," I said. State of Massachusetts, September 2014. "Yes. Then who the hell is Vivian? Irving held the death certificate in one hand and the rescue file in the other. 30 years of police work and FBI consulting behind him. Former chief who'd closed impossible cases and found missing persons and tracked criminals across state lines. And for the first time since I'd known him, he had no answer. Sasha Mendoza died in September 2014, he said quietly. "The girl in your house, the girl with the silver locket, the girl who saved your life, The girl I've had Ellis protecting for 11 years. I don't know who she really is, Sam. I thought I did. I was wrong. I stared at the death certificate. Official, legal, filed with the state. A 4-year-old girl rescued from trafficking died 6 months later from complications no hospital could prevent. But someone had been living in my house for 11 years. Someone who looked at me with Marlene's eyes. Someone who carried a silver dove locket with a photograph she wouldn't explain. Someone who wasn't Sasha Mendoza. The locket, I said. The photograph inside. Who's in it? I don't know, Irving admitted. But whoever gave her that locket knew something we don't. And whatever's in that photograph is connected to why she's here, why she saved you, why this entire conspiracy exists. I cornered Vivian in the darkened hallway at 11:30 that night, and when I asked about the photograph in her locket, her small fingers trembled as she opened the silver clasp. Irving had left an hour earlier with the Sasha Mendoza death certificate, and no answers. Whoever gave Vivian that locket knew something we didn't, he'd said. Whatever was in that photograph connected to why she'd saved my life. I couldn't wait until morning to find out. I found her in the staff annex hallway, preparing for bed, wearing the same simple clothes she'd worn when she first whispered her warning about the poisoned bottle. The silver dove locket hung at her throat, catching lamplight the way it always did. Vivienne, I said quietly. The locket. I need to see what's inside. She froze, one hand moving instinctively to cover the silver dove. For a moment, I thought she'd refuse, run back to her room, keep the secret she'd been protecting for however many years she'd been carrying it. Then she opened the clasp. Inside, pressed against faded velvet, sat a black and white portrait photograph, no larger than a postage stamp. A woman's face. Younger than I was now, maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back and sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore judicial robes, the kind federal district judges wore for official photographs. My mother used to be a judge, Vivian whispered. Denise said when I turn 18, I'll know her real name. Marlene Travers. Dead 14 years. My daughter is alive. The hallway tilted. I put one hand against the wall to keep standing. Marlene Travers, federal district judge for the District of Massachusetts, who I'd met at a circuit conference in Boston in early 2011, who I'd fallen in love with in the brief, terrible way that ended careers and destroyed families, who I'd chosen duty over, chosen my marriage over, chosen the law over, because I thought that's what justice demanded, who died in a car accident in April 2011, 3 months after our affair ended, who I'd never known was pregnant. When's your birthday? I asked, voice rougher than I intended. February 14th, 2010, Vivian said. Denise told me I was born in Boston, February 2010. Which meant Marlene was pregnant during our affair. Which meant she knew. Which meant she'd chosen not to tell me, chosen to protect my career and my marriage, the same way I'd chosen to protect them by ending what we had. And then she died. And somehow this child, our child, had ended up in the system, been trafficked, been rescued, been given to Denise to raise, been placed in my house 11 years ago by Irving Cruz, who'd known something I was only beginning to understand. How many ghosts can one family bury before the ground refuses to hold them? Did your mother, the woman in this photograph, did she ever tell you about your father? I asked. Vivian shook her head. Denise said my mother died when I was very young. She said the locket was all I had left of her. She said someday when I was old enough, someone would explain everything. I looked at this 15-year-old girl, my daughter, who'd been living in my house for 11 years, who'd saved my life with a whispered warning, who carried her mother's photograph without knowing her name or mine. Go to bed, I said gently. We'll talk more tomorrow. She closed the locket, nodded once, and disappeared into her room. I stood in the empty hallway for 10 minutes, breathing like I'd just finished my morning run, trying to process what I'd learned. Marlene had a daughter, our daughter, who'd been trying to save me because someone, Denise or Irving or whoever arranged for her placement here, had told her I was worth protecting. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Lay beside Wanda thinking about Marlene and choices made 14 years ago, and a child I'd never known existed who'd grown up to become the only person in my family who wasn't trying to kill me. The next afternoon, I played chess with Jasper on the backyard terrace, attempting normalcy I no longer believed existed. Jasper was 10 years old, Conrad's son, my grandson. The child I'd held as an infant. The boy who called me grandpa and asked me about law school and wanted to be a judge someday just like me, except he wasn't my grandson at all. Checkmate in 3 moves. I said, studying the board. No fair. Jasper protested, grinning. You always see things I don't. He moved his knight, blocking my bishop. Smart play for a 10-year-old. Conrad had taught him well, Conrad who'd measured poison into my bottle with the same precision he'd taught his son chess strategy. Mom went to Vermont last week, Jasper said casually, reaching for my captured pawn. To the cabin with Uncle Voss. She brought me this. He held out his left wrist. A Hublot watch, expensive, adult-sized, hanging loose on his child's arm. Silver and black, the kind of timepiece that cost more than most people's cars. I took his wrist, gently turned it, to read the inscription on the back. JB, you'll understand why I love you more than anyone else. SD. The Hublot watch gleamed on Jasper's wrist, like a branded confession. JB Jasper Barton. SD Sylvester Dunn. Uncle Voss gave you this? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Yeah. Mom said he's an old family friend. He's really nice. He said when I'm older I'll understand why he cares about me so much. Jasper smiled, innocent and trusting. I think maybe he doesn't have kids of his own, so he likes spending time with me. My stomach turned to ice. Sylvester Dunn did have a child. This child. Jasper wasn't Conrad's biological son. He was Sylvester's conceived during one of Tanya's 47 documented prison visits, raised by Conrad, who had no idea the boy he loved wasn't his. You'll understand why I love you more than anyone else. Because you're mine, not Conrad's. Because Tanya and I created you while planning how to destroy the man you call Grandpa. Because when this is all over, when I've taken everything from Sydney Barton, I'll still have you. I castled my king and watched Jasper's small fingers trace the watch inscription with pride. And for the first time in 71 years, I understood what it meant to lose everything you thought was yours, including the children you believed were your legacy. In 24 hours, I'd gained a daughter I'd never known existed, and lost a grandson I'd loved since birth. And somewhere in Vermont, Sylvester Dunn was watching it all unfold exactly as he'd planned. The fog tastes like iron when I crouch behind the camellia hedge my mother planted in 1976, headphones cold against my ears, waiting for my daughter-in-law to confess my murder. 24 hours had passed since I'd learned Vivian was my daughter, and Jasper wasn't my grandson. 24 hours of pretending normalcy while my family collapsed around me like a house built on sand. Irving had called that afternoon with a planned wireless microphone planted in Tanya's jacket pocket during her spa appointment range of 200 yards, crystal clear audio as long as I stayed within the garden perimeter. She makes her calls at 10 p.m. every Tuesday and Friday, Irving had said. Ellis tracked the pattern. Always outdoors. Always alone. Tonight we hear what she's really planning. So now I crouched in December cold fog, rolling in from Long Island Sound, wearing headphones connected to technology I didn't fully understand, but trusted, because Irving had never steered me wrong in 30 years. Tanya stepped onto the garden terrace at exactly 10 p.m., wrapped in her white cashmere coat phone glowing in her hand. I watched her breath fog in the December darkness, as she checked the hedges for witnesses. Her gaze passed right over the camellia hedge where I knelt invisible in shadow and mist. She thought she was alone. She dialed. The headphones crackled to life. "Darling, the old man's heart is failing faster than we expected." Tanya's voice came through clear, as if she were standing beside me instead of 50 yards away. "Funeral funds still locked in probate, but Friday at the Vermont cabin we can finalize with the lawyer." A man's voice responded deep, controlled, the kind of voice that had convinced juries and negotiated million-dollar deals and planned conspiracies from federal prison cells. "Sylvester Dunn." "Friday works. I'll have Marcus bring the final documents." "What about Conrad?" Tanya laughed. Soft, intimate. The kind of laugh that spoke to years of shared secrets. "Conrad thinks it's a Christmas ski trip. He always believes what I tell him." And the insurance policies, both filed, both active, combined payout $37 million when the old man finally dies. "Your share is already calculated. We discussed this at Cipriani." I pressed deeper into the frozen earth hands, shaking not from cold, but from hearing my death discussed like a business transaction closing on schedule. How many times can a man hear his own death discussed before he stops feeling human? "Well, I've loved you since the day you walked into that Zurich conference in 2015, Tanya said, and her voice changed. Dropped the business tone, became something softer, more genuine. 10 years is long enough to wait. 10 years. Zurich, 2015. The math started writing itself in my mind, even as I tried to stop it. "Conrad never suspected?" Sylvester asked. "Well, Conrad suspects nothing. He thinks Jasper is his son, thinks I married him because I loved him, thinks his father is dying of natural causes. He's useful because he's blind. And after Sydney's funeral, I'll give Conrad 6 months, then divorce. You and I can finally be together properly. Jasper deserves to know his real father." My chest tightened. The headphones felt too loud. Tanya's voice too clear, the words too precise to misunderstand. "Jasper deserves to know his real father." The boy looks like you," Sylvester said, voice carrying pride I'd heard in my own voice when Conrad was young. "Same eyes, same intelligence." "He has your mind," Tanya agreed. "Conrad's too soft, too ethical. But Jasper, he'll be exactly what we need him to be." I thought about chess on the terrace yesterday. The Hublot watch gleaming on Jasper's wrist. The inscription I'd read, "JB, you'll understand why I love you more than anyone else. SD, because you're mine, not Conrad's. Because I spent 10 years in prison planning this revenge and creating a son with the woman who would help me execute it. Because Sidney Barton sentenced me to 18 years, and I sentenced him to watching his family destroy itself from the inside. I love you more than the money, you know that," Tanya said, and I heard truth in her voice for the first time since she'd married my son. "The money is freedom. But you're why I'm doing this." Friday at the cabin. Sylvester confirmed. 2 p.m., Marcus will have the final estate transfer documents. Once Sydney's dead and the probate clears, everything moves to the Cayman accounts. Clean, untraceable, exactly as we planned. I'll tell Conrad it's a romantic getaway. He'll stay in the city, work through Christmas like he always does. "Perfect, I'll see you Friday, darling." Darling. The word carried weight. History. A decade of secret phone calls and Cipriani lunches and prison visits disguised as legal consultations. The tone wasn't transactional, it was intimate, familiar, practiced. The voice of someone who'd been saying that word for 10 years, who meant it every time. Tanya ended the call and stood in the garden for another minute, smiling at the frozen hedges like they were witnesses to her triumph instead of accomplices to my observation. Then she turned and walked back into the house, white cashmere coat disappearing through the terrace doors. I waited until the doors closed, until the terrace lights went dark, until I was certain she wouldn't look back. Then I removed the headphones with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 10 years. Jasper is 10. Tanya met Sylvester in 2015 at a Zurich conference. Married Conrad in 2014. Jasper was born in 2015. The affair started the year Jasper was conceived. Maybe the affair created Jasper. Maybe that was part of Sylvester's plan from the beginning: infiltrate my family, not just through Conrad's greed, but through a child who would carry Sylvester's blood and my name and grow up calling me Grandpa, while his real father orchestrated my murder from prison and then parole. I crawled backward through the frozen camellia hedge headphones dangling from my neck, and the math wrote itself in the fog. Tanya met Sylvester in 2015, married Conrad in 2014, and Jasper was born in 2015. My grandson was never Conrad's son. He was the product of a decade-long affair I only discovered tonight. Ellis Kelly's encrypted email from this morning suddenly made terrible sense. Irving Cruz spreads 47 photographs of Tanya visiting Sylvester Dunn in Attica Correctional Facility across my study table, each one stamped with a date between 2013 and 2022. The Christmas Eve morning light catches on the glossy surfaces, turning my wife's face into a gallery of careful smiles and practiced devotion. Every second Thursday, Irving says, tapping the earliest image, June 2013, 3 months after Sylvester's conviction. Never missed one until August 2022, when the visits stopped. I study the progression. In the first photographs, Tanya looks younger, her hair darker, her expression hungry. By 2015, she's gained weight, pregnancy weight, I realize now. By 2020, she looks comfortable. Entitled. The timeline, Irving continues unrolling a massive flowchart across the photographs. Red lines connect dates like arterial branches. Starts with Sylvester Dunn's RICO conviction, March 2012. 48 months for racketeering money, laundering, wire fraud. His finger traces the first branch. June 2013, Tanya begins visiting Attica. July 2014, she marries Conrad Barton, your son, in a ceremony you paid for. 6 weeks later, August 2014, conjugal visit with Sylvester Dunn, documented here. He slides a prison log toward me. The entry is clinical visitor T. Kellerman, approved, family duration 3 hours. Supervisor notation, extended visit approved. Kellerman was her maiden name, I say. And still is legally. She never changed it. Check your son's marriage certificate. She signed as Tanya Kellerman, filed the certificate as Tanya Kellerman, kept her bank accounts as Tanya Kellerman. She married Conrad for the legitimacy, not the name. The red line continues. May 2015, Jasper Barton born. Full term healthy, 8 pounds 6 ounces. Exactly 9 months after that August conjugal visit. I've suspected this since yesterday, since the Hublot watch with Sylvester's inscription. But seeing the dates mapped out, the calculated precision of it makes my hands shake. Irving opens a manila folder marked Forensic Genealogy Confidential. I had Zenobia pull Jasper's school medical records. Blood type AB negative. Rare, less than 1% of the population. Conrad is O positive. You're O positive. Tanya is A positive. Genetically impossible for Conrad to be Jasper's father. He slides another document across. Sylvester Dunn's prison medical intake from 2012. A B negative. The morning feels thick, airless. My grandson, the boy who calls me Grandpa, who sits at my breakfast table, who'll inherit everything I've built, carries another man's blood. My son raised him for 10 years, believing, never questioning. The flowchart sprawls across my entire desk, now a conspiracy mapped in red ink and annotated dates. Irving's built something prosecutors would kill for, a visual narrative of systematic fraud spanning 12 years. November 2023. He continues pointing to a cluster of dates. First mortgage forgery $1.2 million against the Westport house. Filed the Monday after Thanksgiving. Conrad's insurance policy follows December 2023 $22 million term life through Dr. Gomez's Shell Medical Group. Pattern repeats. Thanksgiving 2024 second mortgage forgery $1.4 million against the Boston property. Thanksgiving 2025 third forgery $1.6 million against this estate. To Tanya's secret policy, I say, the $15 million. Filed November 2025 week after Thanksgiving. Same shell company, same forged medical records. The holidays give her cover, you're distracted, traveling, hosting. She knows your patterns. He taps the final branch, the one that ends 2 weeks ago. December 10th, 2025. Conrad poisons your nightcap at 10:14 p.m. December 10th, 2025. Tanya poisons the same bottle at 10:37 p.m. 23 minutes later. Independent actions, synchronized timing. They weren't working together. They were competing. Racing to murder me first, I say. Racing to collect first. Conrad's policy pays out in 30 days. Tanya's has a 6-month contestability clause. Whoever kills you first controls the estate during probate, positions themselves to claim everything. The conspiracy isn't unified. It's fractured, 2 separate plots colliding in my brandy glass. The revelation should comfort me. Divided enemies are weaker, but it doesn't. It means they both wanted me dead enough to act alone. Irving sets down his pen, reaches into his briefcase, pulls out a red accordion file, the kind lawyers use for sensitive documents. The label reads, Marlene Travers, sealed 2011 in typed block letters. And before we go further, he says quietly, you need to understand who Vivian really is, why she came to this house, why she's the only person in 10 years who tried to save your life instead of end it. My breathing slows. The study feels smaller, suddenly the walls pressing in. I've avoided this file for 2 days, let Vivian keep her secrets focused on the immediate threat. But the immediate threat is mapped now, documented, ready for prosecution. What's left is the deeper question. Who is the girl who warned me? Irving unties the red string closure, opens the file. The first item is a photograph, color, but faded, dated April 2011 on the back. A young woman, dark-haired, perhaps 19, visibly pregnant. She's standing in front of a hospital, one hand on her swollen belly, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. Marlene Travers, Irving says. 19 years old, 7 months pregnant, outside Boston General Hospital. She disappeared 6 weeks after this photo was taken. Never came back for her prenatal appointments. The hospital filed a welfare check with DCFS. He places a second document on top. Adoption papers partially completed, dated May 2011. The birth mother line reads Marlene Travers. The birth father line is blank. The adopting family section is empty, unsigned. She was planning to give up the baby, Irving says. Then she vanished. He looks at me, his expression careful. The baby she was carrying. He pauses. Places one final photograph on the desk. Marlene Travers, younger, maybe 17, standing beside a man in his 40s. His arm is around her shoulders. He's smiling. I recognize him immediately, even though he's 30 years younger in this picture. I'm looking at myself. Irving flips the photograph face up. Marlene Travers stands outside Philadelphia Family Court in August 2011. Her hand clutching a manila folder stamped Adoption Private Placement. Beside her arm, linked through Marlene's elbow, stands Denise Yates. 14 years younger, but unmistakably my housekeeper. Your housekeeper has known since the beginning, Irving says quietly. Marlene arranged the private adoption through Denise 6 months after Vivian's birth. February 2011. Vivian born. August 2011, this photograph. Marlene feared exposure would destroy both your careers, so she gave Denise custody while taking a position where she could watch the child grow. I stare at Denise's face in the photograph. She looks protective, almost maternal. The adoption papers were never filed. Marlene died before the filing deadline. Denise became Vivian's legal guardian by default. No courts, no records, no trail. She's been lying to you for 14 years, but she was honoring a dying woman's wish. Marlene wanted the baby close enough to watch, but far enough to protect. The coffee tastes like ash. Every conversation with Denise, every time she served breakfast, while Vivian cleared plates every moment, my housekeeper watched me interact with my biological daughter without saying a word. It was theater. Careful, compassionate theater. Denise gave Marlene that I say. Irving nods. She gave you both that. You got to know your daughter without the scandal. Marlene got to see her child raised in the house she loved. Vivienne got stability. He slides a second folder across the desk. This one is stamped FBI Declassified 2024 in red block letters. Inside are autopsy photographs I've never seen, despite attending Marlene's memorial service 13 years ago. April 23, 2012. Boston Federal Courthouse. The official report said suicide. Marlene jumped from the 8th floor atrium during a recess. I believed it. Everyone believed it. Federal judges don't get murdered in broad daylight inside their own courthouse. She didn't jump, Irving says. Someone gave her a compound that stopped her heart mid-stride. The fall came after. Cardiac toxin undetectable in 2012, identifiable now with updated forensic chemistry. The compound matches Sylvester Dunn's pharmaceutical expertise. He had access through his securities fraud operation, which involved kickbacks from 3 offshore pharmaceutical suppliers. The photographs show tissue samples, chemical markers, time-stamped analysis. Professional hit disguised as tragedy. Why seal it, I ask, though I already know. FBI sealed it because investigating meant exposing your affair. A sitting federal judge's mistress dies violently inside a federal building. The ethics scandal would have reached the Supreme Court. They chose institutional reputation over justice. How many people have I killed by refusing to bend? The question sits in my throat like a stone. I sentenced Sylvester Dunn to maximum prison time in March 2012. 1 month later, Marlene died. I never connected them. Never imagined my courtroom could reach into my personal life with that kind of precision. Irving watches me process it. The file stayed sealed for 12 years. Sylvester's parole triggered automatic FBI review in 2024. That's when the new toxicology came back. That's when they realized it was murder. But they still didn't investigate. Statute of limitations expired. No living witnesses willing to testify, and you'd retired, no institutional risk anymore. So they declassified it and moved on. Before I explain what that February 2012 letter really contained, are you still with me? Comment A if you think Sylvester planned Marlene's death before Sydney's sentencing, or B if it was pure revenge after. Add one short reason so I can see how you're reading this. A quick note, the next part includes some adapted details to convey the emotional weight of this moment. What matters is the lesson it carries. Irving reaches into the red file one last time. Pulls out a single sheet of paper enclosed in a protective plastic sleeve. The header reads, Intercepted Correspondence, February 7th, 2012. He gave you a choice, Irving says, sliding it across. Show mercy or watch her die. I read the letter. Sylvester's handwriting confident and precise. Judge Barton, your sentencing hearing is scheduled for March 15th. The prosecution is asking for 20 years. I am asking for 5 with credit for time served. If you show mercy, I will disappear quietly. If you choose maximum punishment, I will ensure you lose what you love most. You know what I'm capable of. You've seen the forensic accounting. I don't make idle threats. Choose carefully. Done. My hands shake. I sentenced him to 18 years on March 15th, 2012. Refused his plea for mercy. Chose the law over the threat. And 38 days later, Marlene collapsed in the courthouse atrium. This isn't about money, Irving says quietly. It's about a man who spent 10 years in prison planning to destroy everything you love because you destroyed what he loved, his freedom, and apparently his partner in the pharmaceutical fraud. Marlene wasn't just your affair, Sam. She was his co-conspirator in the original case. You sent them both down. The room tilts. Marlene, brilliant, passionate, ethically conflicted. Marlene had been running securities fraud with Sylvester Dunn while sitting on the family court bench. I never knew, never suspected. I loved a criminal. He recruited Tanya in 2013. Irving continues, his voice steady, relentless. 47 prison visits over 9 years. Arranged her marriage to Conrad in 2014. Orchestrated Jasper's conception during the August 2014 conjugal visit. Planned the insurance policies, the mortgage forgeries, the poisoning, all of it. 14 years of systematic revenge because you chose justice over the woman you both loved. February 7th, 2012. April 23rd, 2012. 75 days. I stare at the blackmail letter, at the autopsy photos, at the photograph of Marlene holding adoption papers outside the courthouse where she would die 6 months later. I refused mercy to protect justice, unknowingly signed her death warrant, and now 14 years later, he's returned from prison to kill everyone I love, including the 15-year-old daughter I never dared acknowledge. The conspiracy isn't about money. It's about making me watch my family die the way I made him watch his freedom die. Irving closes the red file, looks at me with something close to pity. There's one more thing, he says quietly. Wanda knows. Dr. Wendell Gomez arrives at Sterling Manor on Christmas morning with his medical bag and a smile so practiced, I almost believe he cares whether I live or die. 52 years old, trim and silver-haired, he's been the Barton family's concierge cardiologist for 8 years. He built his reputation treating Connecticut's wealthiest families with house calls and discretion. Now I know he also built it on insurance fraud and murder for hire. Judge Barton, he says warmly, setting his bag on the clinic examination table. Tanya called this morning worried about your heart rhythm. Let's take a look. Tanya hovers near the doorway, her expression perfectly calibrated between concern and devotion. The woman who poisoned my brandy 2 weeks ago now plays the attentive daughter-in-law on Christmas morning. Wendell conducts the examination with professional efficiency. Blood pressure cuff, stethoscope, portable EKG. He frowns at the readout, tapping the screen twice. Your EKG shows some irregularity, he says, pulling a prescription pad from his jacket. I'm prescribing Coreg. Think of it as a vitamin for the heart. Strengthens the muscle, regulates rhythm. 50 milligrams twice daily with meals. He tears off the prescription, hands it to Tanya instead of me. She accepts it with a grateful smile. Thank you for coming on Christmas, Dr. Gomez. We're so fortunate to have you. Tanya called me this morning worried about you, Wendell says, snapping his bag shut. She's very attentive to your health. I watch them perform their theater, the concerned wife, the trusted physician, the fragile patriarch. When Wendell leaves, I wait exactly 10 minutes. Then I take the prescription Tanya left on the kitchen counter and search the medical database Irving gave me access to. Coreg is the brand name for carvedilol, a beta blocker used to treat heart failure. Standard dose 5 to 10 milligrams twice daily, titrated slowly over weeks. Wendell prescribed 50 milligrams twice daily, 5 times the therapeutic dose, enough to induce severe hypotension, dizziness, confusion, and cognitive impairment over 6 weeks. Not a heart vitamin, a poison designed to make me look demented. I drive to Zenobia's Hartford office the next afternoon, December 26th. Her practice occupies the top floor of a granite building overlooking the Connecticut River. I've known her 22 years. She drafted every trust, every estate document, every succession plan I've ever signed. Irving sent these over this morning, she says, sliding 2 documents across her desk. I need you to see what they're planning. The first document is a pre-signed diagnosis letter on Dr. Wendell Gomez's letterhead, dated February 12, 2026, 6 weeks from now. The letter declares me cognitively impaired, displaying symptoms consistent with early-onset dementia, and recommends immediate family intervention for medical decision-making authority. The second document is a Greenwich Probate Court petition filed by Conrad Barton, dated February 18, 2026. It requests an emergency incapacity hearing with a 60-day review period. These documents are dated 6 weeks from now, Sydney Zenobia says quietly. They've already planned your incompetence hearing. I read the petition. Conrad requests appointment as temporary conservator during the review period, with authority over all financial and medical decisions. The petition cites my erratic behavior, memory loss, and Dr. Gomez's professional medical opinion. February 12th? February 18th? 60 days. They've scheduled my erasure like a dental appointment. Luntitams. The timeline is surgical. Zenobia continues. Poison you through January, causing cognitive symptoms. Diagnose dementia mid-February. Strip your legal capacity by April. Once the probate court declares you incapacitated, every decision you've made in the past year can be challenged, including any will changes. So I can't simply disinherit them. Not if they get you declared incompetent first. They'll argue you lacked capacity when you made the changes. The court will revert to your previous will, the one where Conrad inherits everything. I stare at the pre-signed diagnosis, at Wendell's forged signature, at the careful choreography of my legal death. They don't need me physically dead anymore. They just need me cognitively erased. What can I do? Beat them to it, Zenobia says. Execute an emergency amendment today. Restructure the estate into an irrevocable trust. They can't touch irrevocable instruments, even if they strip your capacity. I return to her office the next morning, December 27th. Zenobia has prepared a complete estate restructure, the entire $185 million transferred into a 7-year irrevocable trust with independent trustees, staggered distributions, and beneficiary protections. One provision stops me cold. Vivian Marlene Barton, biological daughter, sealed birth certificate on file. 35% distribution, $65 million. Zenobia watches me read it. This trust structure protects Vivian even if they strip your capacity. They can't touch irrevocable instruments. $65 million cannot buy back 14 years of silence, but it can buy her future when I am gone. I sign the amendment. Zenobia witnesses, notarizes, files the original with the probate court. The moment my signature dries, the trust becomes untouchable. Conrad can petition for conservatorship all he wants. The estate is already locked. Sydney, Zenobia says, carefully capping her pen. Do you want to tell Vivian who she really is? Or do you want her to find out from a probate filing? The question hangs between us like smoke. For 14 years, I've watched her grow from a distance, loved her, silently protected her by staying silent. Marlene wanted distance to protect both our careers. But Marlene is dead, my career is over. And the conspiracy targeting my family now includes the daughter no one knows is mine. I don't know, I say. Zenobia opens her mouth to respond. Then her eyes shift to something behind me, and her expression changes. I turn. Through the gap in the partially open door, I see Vivian's reflection in the hallway mirror. She's frozen mid-step, one hand raised to knock documents clutched in her 15-year-old hands. Denise must have sent her with paperwork. Her face shows she heard enough to know her entire life is a lie, but not enough to know I am her father. Her eyes are wide, her breathing shallow, her whole body rigid with the shock of overhearing words that shatter identity. Zenobia's question still hangs in the air. Do you want to tell Vivian who she really is? Before I can stand, before I can explain, before I can say anything, Vivian runs. I hear Tanya's footsteps on the bedroom carpet at 11:30 and keep my breathing slow and regular while her shadow crosses the moonlight toward my bed. 7 days since Vivian ran from Zenobia's office. 7 days of silence between us, though she still serves breakfast and clears plates as if nothing shattered. Tonight she left my bedroom door unlocked. Tanya moves with practiced quiet, her silhouette dark against the window. She's carrying something small in her right hand, a syringe, the needle catching silver light for half a second before she angles it downward. I force my breathing to stay deep, and even my eyelids relaxed, my body loose under the blankets. She reaches the bedside, stands there for 10 seconds, maybe 15, watching my chest rise and fall, testing whether I'm truly asleep or only pretending. I've spent 40 years reading liars in courtrooms. Tonight I become one. Her hand pulls back my sleeve with gentle precision, exposing my left shoulder. The air feels cold against my skin. She uncaps the syringe with her teeth. I hear the tiny plastic click and positions the needle against my deltoid muscle. For Gregory, my love. She whispers, her mouth so close to my ear, I feel her breath. You took him from me 14 years ago, and now I take everything from you. The needle slides in. The sting is sharp, immediate, spreading into a burn as she depresses the plunger. 80 units of insulin, Irving warned me yesterday, enough to drop my blood sugar to fatal levels within 2 hours. Enough to make my death look like undiagnosed diabetes or cardiac failure. She keeps the needle in for 3 full seconds after emptying the syringe, ensuring complete delivery. Professional, clinical. Then she withdraws it, slowly, caps it again, presses 2 fingers against the injection site to prevent bleeding. This is kinder than you deserve, she whispers. You'll just slip away in your sleep. No pain, no struggle. More mercy than you ever showed him. She strokes my forehead once with cold fingers. A gesture almost tender, almost loving. Then she steps back, tucks the empty syringe into her robe pocket, and crosses the room with the same careful silence she brought. The door closes with a soft click. I wait 30 seconds. 40. Count my heartbeats to be certain she's not returning. Then I open my eyes and reach under my pillow for the phone that's been recording since 11:15. The audio is perfect. Her whisper came through clear. For Gregory, my love, you took him from me 14 years ago. The timestamp shows 11:31 p.m. January 3rd, 2026. Attempted murder recorded, confession, motive declared. I check my shoulder in the bathroom mirror. A small red puncture mark already darkening into a bruise. She injected me with something, but the insulin Irving planted for her to find this afternoon was actually saline. Harmless. We switched every insulin vial in the house yesterday while she was in Greenwich. I replay the recording twice more, listening for details. Her voice breaks slightly on Gregory's name. Genuine grief or performed grief, so practiced, it sounds genuine. Either way, it's a name I've never heard in any of Irving's files, any of Zenobia's documents, any of the conspiracy flowcharts mapping 14 years of revenge. Who is Gregory? And how many more ghosts does this family bury? I pull up Irving's encrypted database on my phone, search every variation, Gregory, Greg. Cross-reference with Tanya's maiden name, Kellerman, with Sylvester Dunn's known associates, with the dates she mentioned, 14 years ago, 2012. Nothing. Whoever Gregory is, he exists outside the documented conspiracy. Which means there's another layer I haven't uncovered, another victim whose death I apparently caused, without knowing, another branch of revenge I never saw coming. I'm still searching when I notice the shadow near the doorway. Vivian steps into the moonlight, wearing her white nightgown and the dove locket she never removes. She's barefoot, silent, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. For the first time since Hartford, she looks directly at me. "I swapped her insulin vial with saline this afternoon, sir," she whispers. She just signed her own sentence. She crosses to my bed, her 15-year-old face calm and focused. Opens the dove locket with careful fingers. Inside, where I expected a photograph, there's a tiny camera lens still recording. The red light blinks once, twice. "The locket has a camera," she says. I recorded everything, the injection, the whisper, her face. Multiple angles when I combine it with your phone audio. I stare at her. At Marlene's dark eyes in a younger face, at the analytical precision in how she planned this surveillance, at the ruthless protection she's offering without being asked. You knew she was coming tonight. I've been tracking her schedule for 3 weeks. Every third night she comes to your room at 11:30 and stands beside your bed for exactly 4 minutes. Tonight was different. Tonight she brought the syringe. She closes the locket, the camera lens disappearing. Her hand doesn't shake. Her voice doesn't waver. She's reporting facts the way I used to summarize evidence from the bench, clinical, thorough, emotionally controlled. "I know you're my father," she says quietly. "I've known since I heard that lawyer in Hartford. Vivian Marlene Barton," she said. "Biological daughter. Sealed birth certificate. She has Marlene's eyes and my ruthless precision. The daughter I never raised just became my greatest ally. Vivienne." "You don't have to explain," she interrupts. "My mother wanted distance to protect you both. Denise told me everything after I ran from Hartford. About the affair, the pregnancy, the private adoption that was never filed. About how my mother died in a courthouse 8 months after I was born." She reaches into her nightgown pocket and pulls out a small flash drive, places it on my nightstand beside the phone. "There are 23 other recordings on here," she whispers. "I've been documenting everything since December 16th, the night I first tried to warn you about the nightcap. Conversations, phone calls, meetings. Everything they thought happened in private." Her face shows the weight of 3 weeks, carrying evidence that could destroy my entire family. 3 weeks of a 15-year-old girl playing invisible while recording conspirators who never imagined the maid's daughter might be the judge's child. "Who is Gregory?" I ask. She looks at me with Marlene's eyes and my judicial stillness. "Your first mistake," she says. Tanya's voice cuts through the bedroom darkness at 12:15. "Conrad, it's done. Your father's unconscious call. Wendell, now, we need the death certificate ready by morning." She stands in the doorway, silhouette black, against the hall light, phone pressed to her ear. "Vivian slipped out through the bathroom 10 minutes ago after showing me the flash drive. I've been lying motionless since then, breathing shallow and slow, waiting for Tanya to return and check her work." Conrad's voice comes through the speaker, thin and panicked. "Are you certain? What if someone checks? Show I gave him 80 units. Tanya interrupts, her tone cold and factual. "His blood sugar is crashing right now. Call Wendell, tell him to bring the emergency kit and the paperwork. We need this documented as hypoglycemic shock leading to cardiac arrest." "But Dad's not diabetic. Won't that seem undiagnosed adult onset diabetes, Conrad?" Wendell will note the symptoms in his records going back 6 months. The fatigue, the weight loss, the confusion. It's already in the file. This is what we've worked 3 years for. I keep my breathing steady, my eyelids still, every muscle deliberately slack. 3 years. Not 14 like Sylvester's revenge timeline, but 3 years since Conrad and Tanya began their own parallel plot. Two conspiracies running simultaneously, neither knowing about the other until my brandy bottle became their battlefield. What about Wanda? Conrad asks. Your mother is in Greenwich with her attorney. She won't be back until noon. By then your father will be in the morgue and the death certificate will be filed. Insulin metabolizes completely by morning. It's just another heart failure. She ends the call. Stands there for another 30 seconds, watching my chest rise and fall. Testing. Waiting for any sign I'm conscious, any flutter of eyelids or change in breathing pattern. But I've had 40 years of courtroom discipline, 40 years of controlling my reactions, while hearing testimony designed to provoke. Finally, she leaves. Her footsteps fade down the hallway toward the guest wing where she's been sleeping since Christmas. I wait. Count to 100. Vivian's camera locket recorded the injection, my phone recorded the whisper, and now I have Tanya's phone call admitting premeditation and instructing Conrad to falsify medical records. 3 separate recordings, 3 separate felonies, all committed in the last hour. The house stays quiet until 2 a.m. Then I hear the front door open, hear Wendell's voice in the foyer speaking with Tanya and Conrad. Footsteps on the stairs. 3 sets, Wendell's dress shoes, Conrad's sneakers, Tanya's slippers. My bedroom door opens. Wendell enters first, medical bag in hand, his face visibly nervous even in the low light. Conrad and Tanya hover in the doorway as Wendell approaches the bed. Judge Barton, Wendell says softly, professionally. No response expected. He's here to confirm death, not prevent it. He pulls back the blanket, checks my carotid pulse with 2 fingers. I feel his hand shake slightly against my neck. He holds the position for 15 seconds, then reaches for his stethoscope. The cold metal touches my chest. He listens, frowns, repositions the stethoscope, listens again. His pulse is, it's completely normal, Wendell says slowly. This doesn't make sense. Tanya steps closer. What do you mean normal? I gave him 80 units 2 hours ago. Wendell wraps a blood pressure cuff around my arm, inflates it, watches the gauge. His breathing quickens. 120/75. Perfect pressure. No hypoglycemic symptoms, no tachycardia, no sweating. He pulls back my sleeve, examines the injection site on my shoulder. The small bruise is clearly visible. The injection site shows puncture but no insulin reaction, Wendell whispers. What did you actually give him, Tanya? Normal pulse, normal pressure. The insulin was saline. The trap just closed. I gave him exactly what you provided, Tanya hisses. The vial from the medical kit you left here last week. Wendell's face drains of color. He understands before she does. Someone switched the vials, someone knew the plan, someone has been watching this entire conspiracy unfold and methodically dismantling it. He backs toward the door, medical bag clutched to his chest. I need to leave. I need to... You need to finish this, Conrad says, blocking his path. We're in this together, Wendell. You signed the insurance forms, you prescribed the Carvedilol, you... Let me go, Wendell pleads. Please, just let me go. He shoves past Conrad and runs. Down the hallway, down the stairs, through the foyer. I hear the front door bang open, hear his dress shoes slapping against the stone driveway. Then I hear Irving's voice, calm and authoritative, "Going somewhere, doctor." Wendell stops. I can't see the front gate from my bedroom, but I can imagine the scene perfectly. Irving Cruz and Ellis Kelly, standing shoulder to shoulder, blocking the driveway, exit, arms crossed, faces impassive. Wendell's voice breaks. "I can't do this. I can't commit murder," Ellis asks. "Or can't face the consequences. Did I owe him 1.2 million, Wendell sobs. "I have no choice. He said he'd ruin my practice, destroy my family. 6 years of gambling debts, 6 years of losing at poker games I didn't know were rigged until I owed more than I could ever repay. $1 million debt becomes a life sentence when you choose poison over bankruptcy. You do have a choice, doctor," Irving says quietly. "You just chose wrong." Ellis's voice shifts into formal cadence. "FBI Special Agent Ellis Kelly, Dr. Wendell Gomez, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Wendell's sobbing gets louder, then fades as Ellis leads him toward an unmarked sedan parked beyond the gate. In my bedroom doorway, Tanya and Conrad stand frozen. They heard everything: Wendell's confession, Ellis's FBI credentials, the handcuffs clicking shut. The conspiracy they built for 3 years collapsed in 3 hours. I open my eyes, sit up slowly, deliberately, swing my legs over the side of the bed. Tanya's face drains of all color when she realizes the insulin didn't work, and I've been conscious this entire time. Conrad takes one step backward. "Dad, watch," I say. Ellis Kelly opens a battered military briefcase on my study desk at 3 a.m., and inside are 6 audio cassettes labeled Cipriani Restaurant December 2025 to February 2026, alongside 8 photographs of Tanya meeting Sylvester Dunn on Park Avenue. Conrad and Tanya are locked in separate guest rooms with Irving standing guard. The house smells like cold coffee and adrenaline. Ellis spreads the briefcase contents across my desk with careful precision, the movements of someone who's been waiting years to reveal evidence. 6 recordings from the Cipriani meetings, he says, tapping the cassettes. "December through February, every conversation between your daughter-in-law and Sylvester Dunn. I was there for all of them, disguised as their server. The photographs show Tanya and Sylvester on Park Avenue outside the restaurant. December dates, January dates, February dates. In the final photograph, Tanya is kissing him. Ellis pulls out a sealed envelope marked DNA Analysis Confidential. Hair sample from Jasper collected last week from his hairbrush. Matches Sylvester Dunn's prison medical records. Proves biological paternity. I stare at my driver, the man who's taken me to court to Hartford, to Marlene's grave every April for 11 years. The man who carried my briefcase, opened car doors, waited in parking lots, while I attended depositions and estate meetings. Sir, I've waited 11 years for this moment, Ellis says quietly. I'm Irving's cousin. I was planted as your driver to protect the girl. The room tilts slightly. Vivienne. The Bureau knew Marlene Travers was murdered in 2012. The sealed FBI file from Task 4.3 that wasn't declassified by accident. We've been watching Sylvester Dunn since his parole in 2022, building a RICO case. When Irving told me you'd finally hired him 3 weeks ago, I knew it was time to move. Irving steps into the study, closes the door behind him. Ellis contacted me December 1st. We've been coordinating everything since then: the toxicology, the financial forensics, Zenobia's trust restructure. Every piece designed to protect you and document the conspiracy simultaneously. Every trip to Hartford, every medical appointment, every family dinner. Ellis continues. I was documenting the conspiracy building around you. The FBI couldn't intervene without exposing the Marlene Travers investigation, but we could position assets to protect Vivienne when the conspiracy finally moved from planning to action. For 11 years, a stranger drove me to court, to dinners, to Marlene's grave, and all that time he was the only family member actually protecting me. At 3:45 a.m., a black sedan pulls through the front gate. A woman exits carrying two aluminum cases marked FBI evidence. She's 46, sharp-featured, wearing a navy pantsuit and credentials clipped to her belt. Ellis meets her at the study door. Special Agent Zara Graves, Ellis says. White-collar crime division RICO conspiracy specialist. She's been running this investigation since 2022. Zara shakes my hand with a grip that's professional and brief. Judge Barton, I apologize for the early hour, but we have a narrow window before your family realizes Dr. Gomez isn't coming back. She opens the aluminum cases on my desk. Inside are evidence bags, recording devices, chain of custody forms. She reviews Ellis's cassettes, Irving's financial documents, and connects a laptop to play Vivian's Lockett recordings. The audio of Tanya's insulin injection fills the study. For Gregory, my love, you took him from me 14 years ago, and now I take everything from you. Zara pauses the playback. 3 insurance policies totaling $37 million across state lines gives us wire fraud. The RICO connection to Sylvester Dunn's 2012 securities fraud conviction seals federal jurisdiction. Judge Barton, your family committed conspiracy to murder a federal judge retired, but still protected, under Title 18. Gregor, I say. Who is Gregory? We're still investigating that name, Zara admits. It doesn't appear in any of Sylvester's known associates or Tanya's background checks, but we have enough without that piece. She catalogs the evidence: 47 prison visit logs, forensic genealogy proving Jasper's paternity, 7 mortgage forgeries, 2 fraudulent insurance policies, 23 Lockett recordings, 6 Cipriani cassettes, Wendell's prescription records, and tonight's attempted murder with premeditated phone call. Sufficient for 4 federal warrants, she concludes. Tanya Barton, Conrad Barton, Sylvester Dunn, and one more. At 5:30 a.m., Wendell Gomez sits in my study with his attorney waived and his confession ready. He's aged a decade in 3 hours, face-gray hands, shaking voice barely steady. I prescribed 7 different compounds over 8 months, he says, sliding a handwritten list across the desk. Amiodarone in March, warfarin in May, carvedilol in December. All at toxic doses, all disguised as standard cardiac care. Zara records every word on federal equipment. Who coordinated the prescriptions? Marcus Rourke, Wendell says. Sylvester's attorney. He's the money intermediary, the communications channel. I never spoke to Sylvester directly, everything went through Marcus. Marcus Rourke. The name registers immediately, a Manhattan defense attorney, known for representing organized crime figures, disbarred in 2019 for witness tampering, reinstated on appeal in 2023. If Sylvester used Marcus as his intermediary, the conspiracy has a legal architect. Tanya promised me $3.8 million after you died. Wendell continues, his voice breaking. She said it was a consulting fee for a state medical certification. The payment was structured through Marcus's escrow account to avoid detection. He submits his phone records, 23 calls to a number registered to Rourke Law Associates. Submits a spreadsheet showing payment schedule: $1.2 million on death certificate filing, $1.3 million on probate opening, $1.3 million on estate closure. I documented everything because I knew someday I'd need leverage, Wendell whispers. I'm a doctor, not a criminal. I got trapped by debt and fear, but I'm not stupid. 7 prescriptions, 23 calls, $3.8 million, 4 warrants. Zara closes her evidence cases at 5:43 a.m. and stacks 4 manila folders on my desk, each labeled with a name: Tanya Barton, Conrad Barton, Sylvester Dunn, Marcus Rourke. Shokri, we execute at 6 p.m. tonight, she says, checking her watch. Coordinated arrests. Tanya and Conrad hear Sylvester at his parole residence in Albany. Marcus at his Manhattan office. Until then, Judge Barton, you are the last person they touch. After that, it's our business. I look at the 4 folders. My daughter-in-law, my son, the man who murdered Marlene, and the lawyer who made it all possible. What happens if they run? I ask. Zara smiles. They won't get the chance. The antique crystal chandelier casts fractured light across the anniversary dinner table at 6 p.m., while a piano trio plays Chopin and Tanya Barton smiles at me as though she didn't try to kill me 72 hours ago. 50 years of marriage deserves a proper celebration, or so the invitation claimed. 14 guests assembled in the library, family conspirators, allies, and federal agents disguised as estate consultants. The mahogany table stretches 20 feet, set with porcelain and Irish linen. Conrad sits to my left, face tense. Tanya beside him in navy silk, her hand on his arm with performative affection. Dalton occupies the far end with Wanda, my second son, maintaining careful distance. Jasper sits between Denise and Vivian, 10 years old, and bewildered. Sylvester Dunn sits across from me, introduced as my financial advisor. 62, silver-haired, his face, showing the decade in federal prison. He meets my eyes once. Briefly, he thinks this dinner is my capitulation. Zara Graves sits beside Zenobia in charcoal gray, FBI credentials hidden beneath her blazer. Irving positions near the door, expression neutral. The piano trio performs Chopin's Nocturne near the window. This is the trap. Agent Graves orchestrated this anniversary dinner to gather all 4 conspirators in one location, while federal arrest warrants wait and tactical teams position throughout the estate. Servers present 7 courses over 90 minutes. Oysters, butternut squash, bisque duck, confit roasted lamb, winter greens, cheese, chocolate soufflé. Tanya compliments each dish, her performance flawless. "Why, you look remarkably well, Father Barton," she says during the cheese course. "Better than you have in months." "Clean living," I reply and watch her smile falter. Sylvester and Tanya exchange glances across the table, communications, Ellis photographs, with a camera hidden in the serving cart. Conrad drinks too much wine. Dalton checks his watch 3 times. Wanda presides with practiced grace, oblivious that her marriage ends tonight. After dessert, I stand, tap my wineglass with a silver spoon. 50 years of marriage deserves more than dinner, I say. Zenobia has prepared a final estate document I'd like to share. Zenobia opens a sealed envelope. I activate a remote and an LCD screen descends from the ceiling. The first image appears, timestamp January 3rd, 2026, 11:31 p.m. Vivian's locket footage. Tanya approaching my bed in darkness, syringe in hand. The needle entering my shoulder. Her mouth close to my ear. "For Gregory, my love. You took him from me 14 years ago, and now I take everything from you." Tanya stands abruptly, chair scraping. "He's still alive. You said the insulin would—" Conrad grabs her wrist. "What insulin?" The screen shifts. Audio recording, Cipriani Restaurant, December 18th, 2025. Tanya's voice and Sylvester's discussing timeline, dosages, insurance policies. Their laughter when Sylvester mentions Conrad's stupidity. How does a family celebrate 50 years of marriage while watching a murder confession on screen? Conrad's face drains. "You were sleeping with him all these years." "All these years," Sylvester confirms coldly. "Your wife has better taste than you realized." The screen shows Dr. Wendell's videotaped confession. 7 prescriptions, toxic doses, payment schedule $3.8 million through Marcus Rourke's escrow. Wendell's face fills the screen. I prescribed amiodarone in March, warfarin in May, carvedilol in December at 5 times the standard dose. Tanya lunges toward the screen. Irving blocks her path. "Sit down, Mrs. Barton," Irving says quietly. Sylvester leans back, studying me with something close to respect. You chose justice over mercy 14 years ago, Judge Barton. I chose revenge. We both got what we wanted. Who is Gregory? I ask. Tanya's face twists. You don't even remember his name. You destroyed him, and you don't even... Zara Graves stands. Opens her blazer, revealing FBI credentials, gold badge gleaming. Federal Bureau of Investigation, she says. Nobody move. The library's adjacent door opens. FBI agent Reyes enters, first tactical team leader coordinating the arrests. 4 agents behind him with weapons drawn and vests marked FBI. They spread across the room, blocking exits. Sylvester Dunn, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder of a federal official, RICO violations, and wire fraud. Tanya Barton, you are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and wire fraud. Conrad Barton, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Dalton Barton, you are under arrest for accessory, after the fact, and money laundering. Dalton stands slowly, showing no surprise. My second son, who maintained careful distance, who handled offshore accounts and shell companies I never knew existed. The conspiracy had 3 Bartons, not 2. The piano stops mid-note. In that silence, I hear what I've waited 14 years to hear, the sound of my family's conspiracy ending. Handcuffs close. 4 sets simultaneously, metallic clicks echoing across library walls. Agent Reyes reads Miranda rights while 3 agents escort Sylvester, Tanya, Conrad, and Dalton toward the door. Tanya turns back once. Gregory would have destroyed you if he'd lived. The piano trio sits, frozen hands hovering over keys. Jasper watches his mother being handcuffed, his 10-year-old comprehension struggling. He looks at Vivian, whispers something I can't hear. Vivian leans close, and I see her face change. She looks at me across the table, expression asking permission. What did he say? I ask. He asked if Grandpa Sidney is really his grandfather, Vivian says quietly. Before I can respond, before I can explain genetics and paternity and the truth that will rewrite this child's identity, Wanda stands. I want a divorce, she says. Conrad and I stand behind the one-way mirror at Greenwich Detention Center, watching Tanya in orange jumpsuit. And when the federal prosecutor asks for her statement, she smiles directly at the glass as though she can see her husband's face. Wanda's divorce announcement still echoes in my head from last night. Jasper's question about whether I'm really his grandfather went unanswered as the FBI escorted 4 conspirators from the library. This morning, Conrad asked if I'd come with him to watch Tanya's interrogation. I said yes. Some truths require witnesses. The interrogation room smells like disinfectant and desperation. Tanya sits at a metal table, hands cuffed to a steel ring, her navy silk replaced by institutional orange. The federal prosecutor, a severe woman in her 50s, arranges documents with methodical precision. Mrs. Barton, the prosecutor begins, your husband Conrad raised Jasper as his biological son for 10 years. Is Conrad Barton the biological father? Tanya's smile widens. She angles her face toward the one-way mirror, toward where Conrad stands frozen beside me. No, she says clearly, voice carrying through the speaker. Jasper isn't Conrad's son. He's Gregory's. Conrad's breathing stops. Gregory, the prosecutor repeats, consulting her notes. We have no record of anyone named Gregory in your background check. Gregory is Sylvester's real name, Tanya says, still smiling at the glass. Gregory Sylvester Dunn. He uses his middle name professionally, but I call him Gregory. Called him Gregory when I visited Attica Correctional Facility 47 times between 2013 and 2022. Called him Gregory during our conjugal visit in August 2014, 6 weeks after I married Conrad. The room tilts. August 2014. The timeline Irving mapped with red lines connecting dates: Tanya married Conrad in July 2014, conjugal visit in August 2014, Jasper born May 2015, exactly 9 months later. The forensic genealogy we've had for weeks suddenly gains a name: Gregory. The name Tanya whispered when she injected insulin into my shoulder. For Gregory, my love, you took him from me 14 years ago. Not a separate victim, not another ghost. Gregory is Sylvester Dunn. How you raised another man's child for 10 years, Conrad. Tanya says to the mirror, her voice honeyed with malice. How does it feel to be the fool in this family? Every bedtime story, every school play, every father-son breakfast, you were parenting Gregory's child while I was planning to kill your father and collect millions. Conrad staggers backward. His shoulder hits the concrete wall, then his knees buckle and he collapses sideways off his chair. The observation room guard moves to help him up, but Conrad waves him away, staying on the floor, his face drained of everything. For Gregory, my love. Tanya continues reciting her own whisper. That's what I said when I injected your father with what I thought was lethal insulin. Now you know who Gregory is. Now you know your entire life was a performance I staged while loving someone else. The prosecutor signals to end the session. The speaker cuts off. Conrad stays on the floor. Gregory, Sylvester, the same man. 9 years of lies condensed into one name. Irving and I return to Sterling Manor at 6 p.m. The study feels too quiet after last night's arrests, after the crystal chandelier and piano and handcuffs. Irving places a manila envelope on my desk, stamped Quest Diagnostics DNA Paternity Analysis. Results came back this afternoon, he says. Hair sample from Jasper collected last week by Ellis reference samples from Conrad and from Sylvester's prison medical file. I open the envelope. The report is clinical, thorough, definitive. Alleged father. 1 Conrad Barton excluded. Probability of paternity 0%. Alleged father 2. Gregory Sylvester Dunn not excluded. Probability of paternity 99.97%. Conclusion: Gregory Sylvester Dunn is the biological father of Jasper Barton. Conceived during documented conjugal visit August 12, 2014, Attica Correctional Facility. So this makes Jasper legally entitled to nothing from your estate, Irving says quietly. He has no blood relation to you. Conrad isn't his father. You're not his grandfather. The irrevocable trust you executed protects Vivian, but Jasper has no claim. I stare at the Quest Diagnostics letterhead. 10 years old. A child who calls me grandpa, who sits at my breakfast table, who asked last night if I'm really his grandfather. A child whose mother tried to murder me, whose biological father orchestrated a 14-year revenge conspiracy, whose legal father raised him believing in a family that never existed. The study door opens. Wanda enters, still wearing the formal dress from last night's anniversary dinner. She crosses to my desk, takes the DNA report from my hands without asking permission, and reads it completely in silence. When she finishes, she places her palm flat on the paper. Her hand covers the excluded verdict, the 0% probability, the genetic evidence that Jasper is Sylvester's child. Harry, this child is not at fault. Wanda says, her voice steady and clear. This child did not choose his parents. This child did not plan conspiracy or poison or fraud. This child is still our grandson if we choose to love him. Irving shifts uncomfortably. Mrs. Barton, the DNA is definitive. The DNA is irrelevant, Wanda interrupts. You refused mercy to Sylvester in 2012, Sydney, and it destroyed everything. I won't refuse mercy to Jasper now. He's 10 years old. He watched his mother arrested last night. He asked if you're his grandfather, because he needs to know if anyone still loves him. She looks at me with the same expression she wore 50 years ago when we married. Determined, uncompromising, choosing grace over judgment. Wanda's hand on the DNA report looks like a judge's gavel coming down, but this time the verdict is mercy. Blood doesn't make family, Sydney, she says. Choice makes family, and I choose this child. She folds the Quest Diagnostics report, carefully walks to the fireplace, and places it on the grate. Strikes a match. The paper catches, curls, burns. The letterhead blackens and disintegrates into ash. Wanda turns back to face me, the firelight casting shadows across her face. Now tell me, she says quietly, who is Vivian really, and why does she have Marlene Travers's eyes? She's known about Vivian all along. Before I can answer, Vivian walks into the study. The Bank of America vault attendant slides the safety deposit box across the steel table at 10 a.m., and inside is a single craft envelope sealed with red wax stamped Marlene Travers Estate, May 2012, open only upon request of Sydney Barton. 3 days have passed since Vivian walked into the study and heard Wanda ask about Marlene's eyes. 3 days of careful conversation and questions I couldn't answer without documents I didn't have. This morning, Zenobia called and said the vault was ready. Wanda, Vivian, and I follow Zenobia from the bank's steel vault to her Hartford office. The envelope sits on Zenobia's mahogany desk like evidence waiting for a jury. The red wax seal shows Marlene's judicial stamp from the federal district court, a detail so precisely her it makes my chest ache. Marlene left this with me in April 2012, Zenobia says quietly. 3 weeks before she died. She said, if anything happens to me, give this to Sydney, but only when the girl is old enough to understand. Vivienne sits between Wanda and me, her 15-year-old face pale and focused. She's wearing the dove locket, the one that recorded Tanya's attempted murder, the one that saved my life. The seal has been unbroken for 14 years, Zenobia continues. Whatever's inside, Marlene wanted you to see it together. She picks up a silver letter opener, slides it under the wax seal. The red stamp cracks and falls away in pieces. Zenobia tips the envelope and 3 items slide onto the desk. A folded document on official state paper, a small glass vial containing dried blood, and a handwritten letter on cream stationery. Zenobia unfolds the document first. Her expression changes as she reads. Then she turns it to face us. It's a birth certificate. Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Vital Records. Child's name, Vivienne Marlene Barton. Date of birth, February 14, 2010. Place of birth, Boston General Hospital. Mother's full name, Marlene Elizabeth Travers. Father's full name, Sidney James Barton. Vivian's breathing stops. She stares at her name, her real name, printed in official state registry ink. Not Vivian Yates. Not the maid's daughter. Vivian Marlene Barton. My daughter. Your real name is Vivian Marlene Barton, Zenobia says gently. You were never Vivian Yates. Denise adopted you with falsified documents to protect you after Marlene died. Wanda places her hand on Vivian's shoulder. The gesture is protective, maternal. My wife of 50 years offering comfort to the child of my affair, the grace in that moment is staggering. Zenobia picks up the glass vial. A small label reads, DNA sample maternal blood collected April 23, 2012. Certified by Boston Medical Examiner. The DNA sample proves maternal lineage, Zenobia explains. Marlene wanted no doubt about who your mother was. The blood was collected at her death and sealed by the medical examiner before the FBI closed the case. Vivian Marlene Barton, a name I never spoke aloud, a daughter I never claimed, a love I never acknowledged, until it was too late. Vivian reaches for the handwritten letter with shaking fingers. The cream stationery is thick, expensive, the kind Marlene used for personal correspondence. The date in the upper right corner reads April 18th, 2012, 5 days before her assassination. The letter begins, "To my daughter Vivian when you are old enough to understand." Vivian reads silently for 30 seconds. Then her voice breaks and she reads aloud. "Your father is a great judge who chose justice over love. I chose you over my career. If you're reading this, I am gone, but know that I loved you enough to let Denise raise you in safety, and I loved your father enough to never force him to choose between his family and his heart." Tears stream down Vivian's face. She keeps reading, voice barely a whisper. "So I made mistakes loving a married man. I made mistakes thinking I could balance motherhood and a federal judgeship in secret. But I never made a mistake loving you. You are my greatest decision, my truest choice. Denise will give you stability, education, protection. Your father will give you his example, integrity, fairness, courage. And I give you this letter so you know that everything I did to keep you safe." Vivian's hands tremble holding the letter. Wanda's hand tightens on her shoulder. "The final paragraph destroys me. If you're reading this, someone likely killed me for knowing too much or loving too dangerously. Do not blame your father. Do not blame Denise. Do not blame yourself. I knew the risks when I chose this life, and I would choose it again because it gave me you. Be brave, my beautiful daughter. Be kind. Be the person neither your father nor I had the courage to be. Love you always, Mom." Vivian collapses forward, shoulders shaking with sobs. She knew she was going to die. She knew, and she protected me anyway. Wanda pulls Vivian into her arms, this child who is not her granddaughter by blood, but whom she's choosing to love anyway. My wife holds my daughter while I sit frozen watching 14 years of secrets finally surface. April 18th, April 23rd. 5 days between Mother's letter and Mother's murder. Marlene wrote this, knowing Sylvester's blackmail threat was real, knowing she'd refused to help him avoid my sentencing, knowing that choosing justice alongside me would cost her life. And still, she used her final days to protect Vivian, to arrange Denise's adoption, to seal documents in a vault that would only open when her daughter was old enough to understand. Vivian looks up from Marlene's letter, her face wet with tears. Marlene's dark eyes in a younger face, staring at me with the same intensity her mother once had. "Did you love her?" Vivian asks, the question I've been avoiding for 16 years. The question that might finally let me stop running from the choice I made in 2012. The question my wife is hearing while holding my biological daughter in her arms. Before I can answer, Zenobia slides a second envelope across the desk. This one is also sealed with red wax, also stamped with Marlene's judicial seal. The handwriting on the front is unmistakably hers. To Sydney Reed only after Vivian knows the truth. Wanda opens an old leather suitcase she brought to Zenobia's office and pulls out a thick diary bound in cracked brown leather, the first entry dated August 3rd, 1996, 20 years into our marriage. Vivian's question still hangs unanswered. Did you love her? But before I can speak, Wanda sets the diary on Zenobia's desk beside Marlene's unopened letter and says quietly, "I knew from the beginning, Sam. I knew about Marlene. I knew about the child. And I stayed because I loved you." The diary is worn, pages yellowed and swollen with years of ink. Wanda opens to a random entry, March 2009, and her handwriting fills the page. "Sydney came home late again tonight, smelling like perfume that isn't mine. He thinks I don't notice. I notice everything. But I love him, so I stay." She flips forward. November 2015. The new housekeeper, Denise, brought her daughter to work today. 5 years old, dark hair, dark eyes, Marlene Travers's eyes. I looked at that child and knew immediately whose daughter she really is. I wanted to hate her. Instead, I held her hand and taught her how to set the dinner table. Vivian stares at Wanda, tears streaming down her face. You knew all this time. I loved you as if you were my own daughter, Wanda says, reaching across to take Vivian's hand. I was just waiting for your father to have the courage to tell me the truth. 11 years I waited, loving both of you, watching you grow. She closes the diary. 30 years of entries documenting everything: your affair, Conrad's childhood cruelty starting when he was 12, Dalton's distance, Tanya's manipulations. I saw it all and stayed because walking away was easier than staying, and I don't do easy. 30 years of diary entries, and everyone says the same thing: I knew, I stayed, I loved you anyway. 2 days later, we stand in Greenwich probate court, while a family judge asks 10-year-old Jasper who he wants to live with for the next 18 months, while his parents serve federal sentences. Jasper sits in the witness chair wearing a suit. Wanda bought him yesterday, his dark hair combed carefully, his face showing confusion and grief in equal measure. The probate judge, a severe woman in her 60s, speaks gently. Jasper, your mother and father will be away for a while. The court needs to know, who do you want custody with? Jasper looks at Vivian sitting in the gallery, the girl he thought was the maid's daughter, who he now knows is his biological aunt. The girl he calls Sasha because he couldn't pronounce Vivian when he was 3. Then he looks at Wanda, who's been his grandmother for 10 years, regardless of DNA. He reaches for Wanda's hand. I want to stay with Grandma and Grandpa and Sasha, he says quietly. She saved Grandpa's life. She's brave. I want to learn to be brave like her. On the courtroom video screen, Tanya watches from Greenwich Detention Center. Her orange jumpsuit is wrinkled, her face bare of makeup, her expression destroyed. For the first time since her arrest, she cries genuinely, visibly, the mask finally gone. Take care of my son, she says through the video link, her voice breaking. Please, he's the only thing I did right. The probate judge nods. Custody awarded to Sydney and Wanda Barton, guardianship term 18 months, renewable pending parental incarceration status. Jasper climbs down from the witness chair and walks to Wanda. She wraps her arms around him, and I realize my wife just chose to raise the biological son of the man who tried to kill me and the woman who poisoned my brandy. 3 days after that, federal courthouse in New Haven hosts the sentencing hearing. Judge Catherine Morrison presides, her face impassive as she reviews the evidence compiled by Agent Zara Graves and Irving Cruz. Sylvester Dunn sits in orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, silver hair unkempt, his expression defiant to the end. Judge Morrison reads the verdict without emotion. Gregory Sylvester Dunn, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole for conspiracy to commit murder of a federal official, RICO violations, and interstate wire fraud. You turned love into a 14-year campaign of murder. The court shows you the mercy you never showed your victims: a life sentence instead of execution. Tanya Barton receives 35 years. Conrad Barton receives 22 years. Dalton Barton receives 12 years for money laundering and accessory charges. Dr. Wendell Gomez receives 8 years reduced for cooperation. Agent Zara Graves receives an FBI commendation for the investigation. Then she finds me in the courthouse hallway, while Irving waits by the exit. I, Judge Barton, she says quietly, pulling me aside. 11 people in the Sterling threat assessment file haven't been apprehended yet. Sylvester had more allies than we caught: lawyers, accountants, offshore bankers. They know about you, about your family, about the conspiracy's failure. My chest tightens. You're saying this isn't over. I'm saying stay vigilant. We're working the remaining leads, but these people are professionals. They've already gone to ground. 5 sentenced, 11 still free. 1 child waiting at home. I look through the courthouse windows at the gray January afternoon. Somewhere out there, 11 people connected to Sylvester's conspiracy remain at large. Somewhere out there, Marcus Rourke, the lawyer who coordinated Wendell's payments, has disappeared. The FBI issued a warrant for his arrest on January 8th, but he never appeared for arraignment. But tonight, Vivian waits at Sterling Manor. Tonight, Jasper will sit at my breakfast table legally openly as my grandson by choice, if not by blood. Tonight, Wanda, who knew everything and stayed anyway, will pour tea for a family she assembled from secrets and grace. I stand in Federal Courthouse, New Haven, realizing 11 enemies from the Sterling threat assessment file are still out there. But tonight, a child waits at home, calling me father. As I leave the courthouse, Irving hands me a manila folder marked Sterling Threat Assessment Remaining Subjects 6 to 16. I open it in the car. Inside are 11 photographs of people I don't recognize, but the first name stops my breath. Marcus Rourke, attorney, last seen January 8th, 2026, failed to appear for federal arraignment. Current location unknown. He's still out there and he knows everything. The sunrise through Long Island Sound windows smells like Earl Grey tea and sounds like Vivian's laughter teaching Jasper to boil water 5 weeks after the sentencing. This is the first morning I wake without checking the security cameras. Marcus Rourke is still out there. 11 names from the Sterling threat assessment file remain uncaught. The FBI calls weekly with updates that never contain arrests. But this morning, Jasper is measuring loose tea leaves in the kitchen where Tanya once poisoned my nightcap, and Vivian is showing him how to heat water to exactly 95 degrees Celsius, and I am learning what it means to live with vigilance instead of fear. I sit at the kitchen table with documents Zenobia delivered yesterday. The ink is still wet on the final signature, establishing the Patricia Lawson Samuel Sterling Justice Trust, $95 million, dedicated to human trafficking victim support. Named after my grandparents, who built this manor in 1952. Wanda reads over my shoulder. Your grandmother would have loved this. She always said Sterling Manor was too big for one family. It was never meant to hold just us, I say. It was meant to shelter those who need sheltering. The trust deed outlines the transformation. Sterling Manor's right wing will be renovated into a halfway house for 12 immigrant women starting March 2026. The construction permits are approved. The architects hired the first residents already selected by the New Haven Refugee Center. The house that nearly became my grave will become someone else's sanctuary. Vivian places a Yale Law School acceptance letter on the table beside my coffee. The envelope is thick, official, embossed with the university seal. Class of 2030. The same institution where Marlene earned her law degree 30 years ago. Mom would have been proud, Vivian says quietly. Your mother would have been astonished, I correct. Not just proud, astonished, that the daughter she protected from the shadows will walk openly into the same halls where she once studied carrying her name without shame. Wanda touches Vivian's shoulder. This house was built on justice. Now it will shelter those who need it most, and you'll learn to defend them in the same courtrooms where your parents once presided. 95 million can't bring Marlene back, but it can protect daughters like Vivian from the systems that failed her mother. Jasper carries the teapot to the stove with careful 10-year-old hands. Vivian stands beside him, guiding but not controlling, teaching the ritual the way Denise once taught her. 3 minutes steep time, Vivian instructs. Patience makes good tea. Jasper nods seriously. He's wearing the sweater Wanda knitted him last week, navy blue with his initials on the chest. Not JB for Jasper Barton, but JB for Jasper Beloved. Wanda's joke, but also her truth. The teacup in Jasper's hands holds more than Earl Grey. It holds the weight of 14 years of silence, finally broken. He measures the tea leaves exactly as Vivian showed him. Pours the hot water with concentration that furrows his young brow. Sets the timer for 3 minutes and watches the glass teapot as the leaves unfurl and the water darkens to amber. Grandpa, can I help Sasha make tea for you tomorrow morning too? Jasper asks. He still calls Vivian by the nickname he gave her when he was 3 before he knew she was his aunt, before he knew anything was complicated. Tomorrow morning, I say, and every morning after that. The timer chimes. Jasper carefully pours tea into my cup, the same Wedgwood china that Tanya used for her poison 5 weeks ago. Wanda washed every cup in the house after the arrests, scrubbing them with vinegar and prayer, but this cup I kept separate. This cup I needed to reclaim. Jasper hands it to me with both hands the way Vivian taught him. The tea is perfect, fragrant, smooth, exactly the right temperature. I take a sip and taste bergamot and redemption. Wanda stands beside my chair, her hand on my shoulder. Golden late January light fills the renovated kitchen, new counters replacing the ones where Tanya prepared meals, new floors covering the places where Conrad stood while planning my death, new windows overlooking the sound, where construction equipment now gathers to begin the halfway house renovation. Vivian and Jasper work together preparing breakfast. She cracks eggs while he butters toast. He asks questions about Yale, about law school, about what judges do all day. She answers with patience and truth, never simplifying, never lying. I watch them, my biological daughter and my grandson by choice, and understand something I missed in 50 years on the bench. Justice is not the verdict I pronounce from elevated mahogany. Justice is this ordinary morning when no one in this house is lying. When the child whose mother tried to kill me learns to make tea in the kitchen where she planned murder. When my wife, who knew everything, chooses to stay and love anyway. When my daughter stops hiding in shadows and walks into sunlight carrying her mother's name. There are poisons that cannot be cured by law, betrayal, shame, silence. Only compassion can cure them, passed down through generations in rituals as simple as morning tea. I spent 50 years judging others and 14 years judging myself, and it took a 10-year-old boy making tea to teach me what mercy looks like. I spent 50 years on the bench learning what justice means. I say aloud, and Wanda, Vivian, and Jasper turn to look at me. It took losing everything to learn what mercy means. Vivian kisses my forehead. Jasper climbs into the chair beside me. Wanda pours her own tea and sits across the table, completing our circle. Through the kitchen window, I see the first construction crew arriving to begin the halfway house renovation. Their trucks bear the logo of the New Haven Refugee Center. By March 12, women will sleep in beds where Conrad and Tanya once plotted conspiracy. By summer, this house will shelter those who need sheltering most. Vivian places her Yale acceptance letter on the refrigerator beside Jasper's crayon drawing 4 people holding teacups titled in careful 10-year-old handwriting, "My Real Family." The 11 remaining threats from the Sterling assessment file are still out there. Marcus Rourke has not been found. The FBI investigation continues. Vigilance remains necessary. But this morning, for the first time in 71 years, I understand that justice is not the verdict pronounced in a courtroom, but an ordinary morning when the child I kept secret makes tea with her nephew. And for the first time in this house, no one is lying. The morning tea tastes like forgiveness. And to you listening to my story, remember this family is not just the people who share your blood, but the people who choose to stay when the truth comes out. I spent 71 years believing justice meant following the law without exception. I refused mercy to Sylvester Dunn in 2012, and it cost Marlene her life. I kept Vivian's secret for 15 years, and it nearly cost me everything. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait for poison in your nightcap to finally tell the truth to the people you love. The lesson I learned isn't in law books or courtroom verdicts. It's in ordinary mornings when a 10-year-old boy makes tea for his grandfather by choice, not blood. It's in a wife who knew everything and stayed. It's in a daughter who protected me when I lacked courage to claim her. I believe God put me through this darkness to teach what I failed to learn in 50 years on the bench. Mercy is not weakness. Forgiveness is not surrender. And family is what you build when you stop lying. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven your family? These grandpa stories aren't just mine. They're lessons we all share. If you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share it with them. And if you'd like more grandpa stories like this one, subscribe to Dad's Revenge Stories. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your presence here means more than you know. One final note, certain details in this story have been adapted for storytelling purposes, but the heart of the message, the lesson about mercy, truth, and family, is what I hope stays with you long after this video ends.